Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto learns Rasengan from the Forbidden Scroll Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The annoying buzz of a sleeper's worst foe was ringing loudly in his ears. With a frustrated growl, the mop of blonde hair tired to crawl deeper inside of his stiff pillow. As his groggy mind unwillingly returned to the land of the living, he lashed out blindly at the noise. Any relief he may have felt at striking the object was squashed when it fell from the bedside table and clattered loudly on the floor. Succumbing to anger, Naruto climbed out from his mattress to pummel the enemy of his sleep. He couldn't wait to become Hokage. Then he'd have the village's respect. He could walk proudly down the streets. People would smile and wave. Everyone would be happy and get a good night's sleep. Maybe he could pass a law that outlawed evil clocks. A glare at the aforementioned instrument made all thoughts vanish when what it was showing clicked in his befuddled brain. 6 o'clock in the morning, and the academy started at 6:30. That would mean, I'm gonna be late. He screamed as he jumped and tried to do a million things at once. He was trying to pull on a too large orange vest while holding a cup of instant ramen in one hand. The other hand was attempting to slip on a sandal that was obviously too large for his small feet as he rushed out his door. Despite how much of a hurry that he was in, he did take the time to pause long enough to lock his door. Then he sprinted as fast as his short legs could carry him. Dressed in a simple white kimono, a quiet, little girl stood outside the gate to Konohagakure's most prestigious clan. One would think that being the heir to the clan and a user of an advanced bloodline would have the girl carrying herself like some kind of royalty. But her face was down and her shoulders were slumped, suggesting a timid nature. She was waiting for a chunin to arrive and escort her to the Konoha Shinobi Academy. In a small bag in her hands was a bento and several writing utensils and accessories. The white lavender-eyed girl kept glancing from side to side, looking for the chunin lady. Sighing, Hinata began wondering if she should journey to the academy by herself. But this train of thought ended when she spotted a dust cloud and a rapidly growing orange figure approaching. A blonde-haired boy, probably close to her age, was running as fast as he could in clothes that barely fit him. As he was almost to her, he suddenly dropped a small package. He tried to stop and dash back for it, but he stumbled on his sandals and went tumbling in a heap to land at the startled Hinata's feet. Dropping her bag reflexively, she watched as the boy righted himself. Sitting up, he rubbed his sore head and aching chest, panting quite heavily. Peeking an eye open, he saw a pair of small feet and a bag beside them in front of him. Hinata had just worked up the courage to speak when the strange boy looked up. His face, though slightly tanned, was red as he tried to catch his breath. He tilted his face slightly to the side as he gazed at her with the brightest set of blue eyes she'd ever seen. Her cheeks instantaneously reddened slightly at his piercing yet gentle gaze. Chuckling loudly, he put on a large, toothy grin as he started rubbing the back of his neck. Just my luck to trip, eh? Glancing around, he spotted his ramen only a few feet away. Looking back up at the dark blue-haired girl, he tried to decide which he should do, make a friend or get to the academy? He chose the former. After all, he didn't exactly know where the academy was. What's your name? A very large grin and eager eyes stared up at her as he continued, I'm Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage of Konoha. He was talking to her, and waiting for a reply. She knew that she had to answer. Her slightly red cheeks seemed to brighten as words twisted and tangled in her throat, never quite escaping. Finally, after much strain on her part, she managed to stutter out, Hyuga Hi Hinata. Hyuga Hinata? He repeated, testing the name. Hi. Naruto's grin widened, but it seemed different than before. She didn't know exactly why, but this time it seemed to reach his eyes. Okay, he said happily. Do you know the way to the Shinobi Academy, Hinata-chan? This time her whole face turned a very bright sakura. The only person to have called her Hinata-chan before was her mother. Hinata was spared from having to answer the question, however, when another female spoke up. She was just leaving for the academy, Uzumaki-san. Both children visibly jumped when they heard the voice. They faced the pretty, red-eyed chunin with varying degrees of surprise, fear, and embarrassment. Hinata felt ready to faint at getting caught by surprise with this boy. Her already deep blush could easily decipher the degree of her embarrassment. Naruto could only look at the woman with fear that she might make him leave his new friend. Yuhi Kurenai watched the two children thoughtfully for a moment. She would have to be blind, deaf, and dumb to not see the beginnings of a crush in her young charge. And not a person in Konoha had no heard of the demon boy's dream of one day becoming Hokage. It took little imagination to see why the two were together. Picking up Naruto's forgotten cup of instant ramen, she handed it to him as he climbed to his feet. Glancing from one child to the next, she let a small smile out. These two would make an adorable couple in the future. Come on, Hyuga-sama, Uzumaki-san, she said as her smile widened slightly. We don't want you late for your first class. The statement earned her another blush from Hinata and a surprised, but fast-growing smile from Naruto. As the classroom began to fill, Yumino Iruka was able to identify a fair number of children from the more prominent of the Konoha clans. There was an Aburame boy who was as silent as a majority of his clan, and a Kimichi boy who was looking around with uncertainty at the other children, a loud Inuzuka boy who was trying to impress several other students, an unusually quiet Hyuga girl. The Nara boy seemed to be falling asleep where he sat as the Yamanaka girl beside him was trying to talk to him, and of course an Uchiha boy who was sitting quietly in seat. And last, but not least, there was one annoying blonde that he wished that he didn't have to deal with right now. Upon his entry into the classroom, the blonde had yelled out, "I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I'm gonna kick all your butts one day." This loud announcement had everyone's attention on him. Yet it might have been more impressive if he hadn't tripped on his hand-me-down sandals for the second time that day. Now burning with shame, Naruto was sitting crouched over in his seat. "All right, everyone," Iruka called out. "Please sit down and be quiet, class will be starting shortly." Once the raucous had settled down somewhat, he said, "My name is Yumino Iruka. While you train here, you are to call me Iruka-sensei." Even as Iruka began his welcoming speech, he noticed several students' attentions wandering already. The one person who seemed to be the most interested was Naruto. But as all 6-year-olds did, he grew bored of Iruka's droning voice quickly enough. When the students began introducing themselves, the blonde could hardly wait. People would notice him, if for only a moment. This excitement was enough to squash his earlier embarrassment. He waited impatiently for the others to have their turns. But when it came for his turn, Iruka called the girl that was after him. Instantly Naruto was on his feet, cutting off Yamanaka Ino's introduction before it even began. "Iruka-sensei, it's my turn." "No," the scarred teacher said. "It would have been your turn if you hadn't felt the need to introduce yourself early." This got scattered snickers and giggles from the other students. Sputtering for a second, he threw a fierce glare at Iruka. "That's not fair." "Life is never fair, Naruto," Iruka said gruffly, trying to suppress memories of his deceased parents. "Now sit down. Yamanaka-san, please continue." Very angry, Naruto spent the remainder of the morning sulking. Thanks to his inattention, he was spared having to notice a withering glare from the blonde girl that would have had him trembling in unconditional fear. When Iruka called a break between classes, Naruto was the only one to remain in the class. From his obvious frown and angry glare, he was still sulking. So Iruka let him be and left the room. Once class resumed, Iruka had the students get out their history books. He sat behind his desk as he lectured the beginning of their village and the importance of the shinobi clans. During the whole lecture, Naruto was staring at him with a peculiar look in his eye. It unnerved him enough to stand up to ask him what the problem was, or try to stand up. Upon a quick inspection, he found that the chair was apparently superglued to him. But he only figured this out after he stood up. The chair legs hit loudly against the wall behind him, attracting the attention of the rest of the class. As they watched Iruka try to figure out what possessed the seat to stick to him, the class broke out in loud snickers and giggles. But when Naruto finally lost control and fell out of his seat laughing, the rest of class quickly followed suit. "Naruto!" Iruka's angry yell cut through the academy walls like a knife through butter. "Detention tonight." He scrubbed. He swept. He mopped. And scrubbed some more. After what seemed like days, Naruto finally was able to put the cleaning supplies away. Iruka had watched over him like a hawk the entire time, making sure he did every inch. Now the blonde boy stood in the center of a very clean floor. As he was walking for the door, Naruto's stomach let out a very loud grumble. Glancing down sadly at his empty belly, he could only pout. Iruka-sensei hadn't even let him stop to have dinner. "Naruto," the young teacher said, not the least bit sympathetic. "Yes, sensei?" The strain in the boy's voice to not start being verbally disrespectful was apparent from the glare he shot towards the Chunin. "It's late," so he paused, trying to think of a way to word his thoughts. "I'll take you to a little restaurant for dinner, my treat." "What do you say?" He wasn't doing this because he liked the boy, but because, as a teacher, he needed to make sure the boy got at least a fair meal before going home. There was a moment of silence as Naruto's brain processed what it just heard. Then a slow smile broke out across his face. The next thing Iruka knew, he had an orange bundle hugging him fiercely while thanking him over and over again. The restaurant turned out to be a little ramen stand called the Chiraku. After only one bowl of miso ramen, Naruto yelled out at the top of his lungs that this was the best ramen he'd ever tasted and that Ichiraka had just become his newest, most favorite restaurant in Konoha. He ended up having 9 more bowls. Iruka was glancing at him with mixed feelings of surprise and disappointment. How could he eat so much ramen and not get sick? But because of the boy's surprising appetite, a considerable portion of his salary now lined the old man's pockets. "My lord," Tochi said as he cleaned a table nearby. "It hasn't been this cheerful around here since the yondaime was last here." "Really?" Iruka asked, facing the man. "I didn't know he came here." "Oh yes," Tochi said offhandedly. "Quite often, actually." "Who's yondaime?" Naruto asked innocently. "You don't know?" Both men asked simultaneously. "Yondaime Hokage is the one who defeated Kyuubi no Kitsune 6 years ago," Iruka said, switching into lecture mode automatically. "He was a great man who loved this village and was a very, very strong shinobi." Tochi nodded. "He was a genius with crafting seals, and I heard he even created his own attack jutsu, the Rasengan, I believe." Completely awed, Naruto practically yelled out his questions in quick succession. "Wow! What did it do? Can anyone teach me? Is it really powerful? I want another bowl." Chuckling, Tochi left to make the boy's 11th bowl. Iruka stared down at the boy's hopeful face. The eagerness in his eyes was almost a palpable thing. The boy was going to hate what he was about to say. "Sorry, Naruto, but no one knows anything about it. Yondaime was the only person who knew how to perform it, at least that's what I've been told." Naruto visibly deflated at that information. He had hoped to learn an awesome, ultra-super strong jutsu that proved he was destined to be Hokage. If being strong meant having strong techniques, and no one could teach him any, then. His head snapped up and a foxy grin spread across his face. The grin was infectious due to his pure sincerity. Then he said in a loud voice filled with determination 4 words that would change history. "Then I'll make one. Chakra, the mental and physical energies a shinobi wields to create, activate, and maintain jutsus. Hand seals, the different symbols of the hands that chakra can be molded into to form jutsus. Different combinations of hand seals unleash different jutsus." Naruto sat in his apartment, reading by the moonlight. The stove in his small home was the only source of heat, and that heat was scarce at best. If his window wasn't broken, the cramped home could have contained the warmth a little easier. Growling in frustration, Naruto slammed the book shut. It was as close to useless as it could get, only the theory and definitions of the use of chakra and hand seals. It didn't tell how to mold the chakra into the hand seals. Maybe he shouldn't have rushed off to buy the first book on chakra he saw. A wide yawn escaped him as he stood. Stretching, he felt relief surge through his sore limbs. Another yawn and he trudged over to shut off the stove. His small body was tired from all the stress it had gone through earlier. Even with his unusually high stamina, he was bone-weary. As soon as his head hit the pillow, he was asleep. "Deception is an essential ability that all shinobi must have," Iruka said to the class. "To pretend you are weaker than you truly are can cause an overconfident opponent to underestimate you. That could allow you to either win a battle against an enemy of equal strength, or to escape safely." The class seemed to be lulled into a trance by Iruka's speech. While several keywords did survive, most of the lecture fell on weak ears. It was understandable, kids want to practice, train, or do something physical. Trapped in an uncomfortable chair of a hot classroom for a boring lecture was more than they could stand. But while their bodies couldn't leave, their minds wandered. Taking a brief pause, Iruka glanced up and saw that many eyes were glazing over in drowsiness and heads were drooping. Sighing, he walked to his desk and slammed the book down loudly on top of it. Instantly, all eyes were open and on him. Letting a small smirk cross his face, he called out, "Naruto?" The blonde lifted his slouched head off his arm at the sound of his name. Looking up at his sensei, he said, "Hi, Iruka-sensei? What would be another use of deception that you could use in your everyday life?" he asked, watching the blonde expectantly. Desperately, Naruto tried to understand the word deception, but he had rarely ever heard such a weird word used before. Well, if he couldn't answer the question right, then he could at least try to get a laugh out of it. "I'd use it to add more flavor to my miso ramen." Iruka gave a rather heated glare at the blonde. The uncertain laughter Naruto was trying to spread to the other students died as he noticed no one had even paid attention to him. "Sakura-san," Iruka said in a kind, if strained voice. He was certain that if the kids weren't going to listen to him, then listening to their friends and classmates would aid them in remembering. "Same question." Sakura stared at Iruka for a moment with wide eyes. Her cheeks reddened as she felt the stares of the class heavily on her shoulders. Thinking for a moment, she tentatively answered, I know, Iruka-sensei. If a shinobi wanted to hide a secret about himself or what he could do, he could act certain ways. He could do things that would make people think less of him. Smiling kindly, Iruka said, "Very good, Sakura-san. That is exactly what many shinobi do." Speaking louder, Iruka drew their attentions again. "Now it is time for your split training. All boys come with me. Girls, you shall remain here until your other sensei arrives in a few minutes." As the boys were filing out, Naruto heard a very faint gasp that sounded like Naruto-kun. Glancing at the girl he just passed, he saw white eyes and red cheeks. He smiled brightly at her for a moment. However, in doing so, he had paused right in the middle of the aisle and in front of a rather impatient Inuzuka. Kiba growled as he shoved Naruto out of his way. Ignoring the blonde, he continued forward. Thus he didn't see Naruto land in Sakura's lap. Sakura, having her back to him when it happened, retaliated with far more aggression than anyone had ever seen from her. "Get off me, Uzumaki!" she yelled angrily in his face as he futilely tried to apologize. Grabbing a handful of his hair, she pulled her free arm back. The next instant, Naruto was once again in front of Kiba but with a rapidly swelling eye. Sitting up, Naruto put on his favorite foxy grin. Ignoring the pain, he called out in a voice filled with awe. "That was an awesome punch, Sakura-chan." "Don't call me that," Sakura snapped, a throbbing vein just barely visible under her long pink bangs. "Why?" he asked innocently. "Because I'm not your friend, Baka," she growled. "Oh, okay," he said, sounding sad. Then, in the blink of an eye, his face changed back into its usual happy mask. "Bye, Sakura-chan." As the pink-haired kunoichi in training fumed, Hinata felt a tight knot tie itself around her. Rapidly growing depressed, she couldn't help but ask to herself, did Naruto-kun like Sakura-san? Did he still want to be her friend? Was she even worthy of being his friend? But through her depression, she found that she probably wouldn't have the courage to talk to him for a little while. The walk home for him was a particularly peaceful one for him. The villagers didn't spare him a second glance. It seemed as though they were taking a short break from tormenting him. That alone put him into a good mood. But he'd also finally learned how to tap into his chakra today. It was a lot harder than he thought it would have been, requiring intense concentration. The goal Iruka had given the class was to channel chakra throughout every part of his body. It took him much longer than any of the other students, but he'd been able to get it after a while. Racing through Konoha as fast as he could go, he made a beeline for his apartment. After a small meal of 5 instant ramen packages, he propped himself on his bed to practice the chakra molding again. He knew if he could master this ability quickly, he'd be another step closer to his ultimate goal. Replaying the lecture through his mind, he focused. As he felt the chakra rising and being channeled, a fragment of the lecture floated through his mind. It specifically was Sakura's speech on what current shinobi do to hide things. If a shinobi wanted to hide a secret about himself or what he could do, he could act certain ways. He could do things that would make people think less of him. "Yes, that's what I'll do," he thought as he let the chakra slip away. A devious grin broke across his face as he imagined what was to come in the future. "I'll act, nobody will know or even guess what I'm doing." Almost 6 years have passed since Uzumaki Naruto, unofficial demon of the Leaf Village, entered the Shinobi Academy. The village has had a number of pranksters in the past, but none would probably ever be as infamous as Naruto. He pulled pranks as a means of petty vengeance, to relieve boredom, or to brighten an occasionally bad day. In short, almost everyone has been a victim of his. Today, the terrible prankster stood in the middle of a wooded area. Carefully checking that he was alone, he smiled. Years of pulling pranks in village dominated by large numbers of shinobi had forced him to adapt and develop skills that he probably wouldn't have acquired for some time. Like to sense when a person was nearby, even though they're hidden, and to notice in the slightest change of wind any new sense it carried. In all, he was gifted with sensory abilities of such thoroughness that they put most jounins to shame. Going through the necessary hand seals, he engaged his first attempt at creating his own jutsu. His original inspiration for it came from a simple henge. If shinobi were meant to be spies, then he should create a super cool henge that would be the ultimate spying ability. So he spent some time observing older shinobi, and what he found disgusted him. Most shinobi were males, and near all of them were perverts. That ruled out the choice of what sex the henge would appear as. He started practicing with normal henges. The first ones merely gave him more feminine features and a pair of pigtails. That was the easy part. Then he tried to make the henge a bit more scantily clad, wearing only her undergarments. For some reason, he could tell it was far from perfect. Dropping the henge after another failed attempt, he sat down to ponder what was wrong. He knew what the ultimate goal of this jutsu was to be, perverted as it was. He knew it had to be completely perfect for it to work successfully. So far he could get the shape of the arms, legs, and face. But because he didn't know what a truly nude girl looked like. "That's it!" he cried out, jumping to his feet. He left his training area behind in a blur. It took only a short run before he was back in Konoha. His destination was the nearest bookstore, since he wouldn't demean himself to peep like a pervert. Silently slipping past the drowsy man, Naruto found his needed research material. Chuckles broke out of his throat as he mesmerized the shapes, curves, and angles of the women in the magazine. Oh, he hated perverts, but it would be so much fun to see their reactions to this jutsu. "Get out of my store, Naruto," a voice filled with menace growled from behind and above him. Flinching at getting caught, the boy glanced nervously behind him. The expression on the once sleepy man's face promised immediate and painful retaliation should he not comply with the demands. "I need a sparring partner," he thought moodily. He had just spent the last 3 hours honing his accuracy with kunai and shuriken, then alternating between his taijutsu and ninjutsu. While his form was nearly perfect, the lack of a decent or superior partner was preventing him from reaching new heights. The only thing he wanted was to kill his. No, he wouldn't even consider that man any relation to himself, that man who had so easily destroyed his life and clan. For his vengeance, he needed far more power. For that, he needed a partner. Having grown irritated with his solo practice, Uchiha Sasuke left his training field. At first he merely walked through the streets of Konoha, looking for something that could entertain him enough to get his inspiration to train back up while avoiding that ridiculous fan club he'd somehow acquired. He almost wished that blonde baka would make a random appearance. What that dobe seemed to possess was an uncanny ability to both piss him off while giving his ego a good boost. As if Sasuke had performed Kuchio's no jutsu, the blonde appeared on the street at his feet after having been thrown out of the door of a bookstore. Naruto had what looked like a growing bruise on his right eye. "Don't let me catch you in my store again, Uzumaki!" A man growled dangerously from inside the store that Naruto had made a rather ungraceful exit from. Not waiting for a reply, the man slammed the door shut. "When I become Hokage, I'm gonna cook your ass over a slow fire, team," the blonde growled moodily, more to himself than anyone else. Sasuke smirked conceitedly, which drew Naruto's attention. "The day you become a Kage will be a sad day indeed." "Shut up, Sasuke team!" Naruto yelled as he bounced to his feet. "A dobe will never be anything other than a dobe, baka," Sasuke said as he started to walk away. He knew he was pushing Naruto's buttons, but he was bored. Clenching his jaw and fists tightly, Naruto tried to think up a comeback, but as usual Sasuke seemed to be leaving him in the dust. If there was one thing that he truly couldn't stand, it was Sasuke's superiority complex with him. Perverts, the unyielding villagers' hatred of him, and his frustration at not completing his own jutsu all took the backseat when the last Uchiha was involved. As the Uchiha was strutting away, Naruto lost his temper. Dashing for the unprotected boy's back with all the speed he could muster, he let an angry roar of "I'm gonna crush you, team!" Sasuke hardly moved until Naruto was nearly on top of him. Then, faster than Naruto could react, Sasuke ducked under the punch as he swept his leg back. This resulted in Naruto being tripped and, with his momentum built up to its maximum, was sent tumbling down the street a short ways. After reorienting himself for a second, Naruto was charging Sasuke again. His fist nearly touched the dark-haired boy as he sailed in again. Merely shifting his weight, his knee came up and into the blonde's gut. Withdrawing, Sasuke spun on his anchored heel and he sent Naruto flying through the air with a sweeping kick. This kick sent the blonde crashing through the window of a store. The stoic mask slipped slightly as he heard the surprised, then furious yells of the customers and employees inside as Naruto futilely tried to apologize and escape. Deciding he had sufficiently inflated his pride for the moment, he walked away. Behind him, he heard Naruto get thrown back out into the street. Across from the store he'd made a similar exit from with a growing bruise around the other eye as well. He was in a very foul mood, so he spared no prisoners on his little battlefield. Slurping up the remainder of the ramen, he placed the bowl on the rather high stack of the dozen already consumed bowls. The pile promised to continue climbing as he hollered for another. As he waited for his miso ramen to arrive, he took up a slightly disheveled scroll from the side. On it were the instructions for the different uses of chakra and how to manipulate it. Scribbled along the edges of the scroll were notes he'd written. After finally completing his first jutsu, he started on plans for his second. It took him many hours of secretive researching, stress, and one dumb cat chasing a ball for him to finally get an idea. What he needed was a much more detailed description for chakra usage and control. But the academy just didn't have what he was looking for. Even though he begged and pleaded until he was blue in the face, he couldn't wrestle the information out of Iruka-sensei, who'd finally started to treat him a bit more humanely. Iruka claimed that if Naruto couldn't get the basics of the basics completely, then he most certainly couldn't do the more advanced practices. Next, Naruto took his complaints to the old man, but Sandaime seemed to agree with Iruka. Naruto's frustration at getting denied by the people he most respected was taking him to a breaking point, and the only other alternative that he really didn't want to do. Just as he seemed ready to commit theft, the scroll appeared. He'd opened his apartment door one morning as he was rushing to the academy and slipped on it. Though there was no one in sight, he could faintly smell the lingering scent of lilacs. Naruto was so happy that the scroll held all the information that he needed that he made no attempt to pay attention in class that day, instead focusing on reading the scroll. Now that he had it, what kind of jutsu would he make? Of the basic elements that most jutsus were derived from, he couldn't make up his mind between fire or electricity. As he pondered this dilemma, he began to absent-mindedly start stirring his ramen slowly. What he wanted was a jutsu that could do a lot of damage in an instant. Now he reasoned that a stabbing jutsu could easily live up to that condition, but the thought of shoving his arm through a person's body didn't sit too well with his stomach. Sighing in defeat, he glanced down at his bowl. The noodles were tangled around his chopsticks in a spiral pattern while the soup swirled around, giving the ramen a distinctive spinning motion. Swirling, spinning, drilling. An excited cry of victory tore itself from Naruto. The answer was simple. A drilling jutsu could do the most damage, especially if it spread out once inside enemy's body. Now he just needed to find a technique that would teach him how to spin chakra. As this thought was forming in his mind, he discovered the answer to it almost simultaneously. Ramen had all answers. Water. With water he could feel the chakra moving and feel how well it was working. But he couldn't hold water, obviously, so he'd need a water balloon to get started. First, he'd need to learn how to spin the water inside the balloon at great speeds. Then, because it was an expanding drill so to say, he'd need to somehow destroy the balloon. As to how he could do this, he wasn't sure, but he decided to cross that bridge when he came to it. Quickly finishing and paying for his meal, he left. Stuffing the scroll into the pouch he wore on his belt on his new orange jumpsuit, he raced off to the nearest store he could find. Ignoring the icy glares the adults shot him, he grabbed a whole handful of balloons from the jar by the cash register. As usual, he was forced to pay a horrendously inflated price, even for balloons. Racing out of the door, Naruto had every intention of running off to his secret training area. But he ran face first into an unyielding wall of muscle. From his new position on the ground, surrounded by his new balloons, he glared hotly up into two pairs of cold white eyes. Cold eyes watched the confrontation between the Hyuga clan members and the Bane of Konoha. The man wore merely a simple Chunin flak jacket and the normal shinobi accessories. His face was bland with no distinguishing features. He watched disdainfully as the Hyuga snarled at the boy. As they got into a heated battle of wits and words, the man couldn't help but question the level of intelligence of the villagers. Why couldn't they see that there was a large and rather obvious difference between a loud, attention-starved child and the incomprehensible, bloodthirsty Kyuubi? Oh well, at least this dark life had the potential to make him stronger. That would make his job more interesting in the long run. Smirking, the man left the scene as one of the Hyuga used the hack Rokujin show on the loud blonde, as it seemed he'd gotten the better of the two verbally. The boy's loud and rather colorful curses escorted him out of the village. The man's smirk didn't fade, not even after he dropped the three-layered henge. His blood-red eyes seemed to glow in anticipation. Only a little while longer, he thought relatively gleefully. Then we'll be ready. He'd only come into this section of town twice that he could remember. The first had been when he'd gotten lost on his way to the Shinobi Academy on his first day oh so long ago. The second had been only a few days afterward, when he tried to come and play with Hinata-chan. But he'd been more than unpleasantly threatened, or as they said, promised, many gruesome and painful experiences should he return to their area again. Since then, he'd avoided the section like the plague. Those white-eyed bastards were all over the place here. That was because their clan compound seemed to be located here. He disliked them very much because of the look of superiority all of them seemed to share. All of them were uptight, arrogant bastards who really needed to be brought back down to earth. So he now considered it his sworn duty to do just that. It was high time that they learned that they weren't all powerful. That was the reason why he was here now in the dead of night, revenge, Naruto style. After the Hyuga closed his Tenketsu points, he had hurried off to his apartment to rest. For some reason that he couldn't understand, when he tried to do his chakra molding exercises, he couldn't bring it out. It was like it was being blocked off or something. As he futilely tried to access his chakra, a brilliant idea had formed in his mind. Using his considerable stealth to the absolute best of his ability, he snuck inside the Hyuga compound. Then, from one building to another, he raided their homes. Though he was extremely careful what he took, only the most humiliating of things that he could. He had once heard of the abilities of the legendary Byakugan, to see through things, to see people's inner chakra coils, and nearly 360 degrees of vision. So if he made even the slightest noise, a board creak, a sneeze, even breathing too loud, he knew he'd be in a world of pain. He would immediately hinge into a section of the floor or a rug if he heard the slightest sound or smelled something out of place. This paranoia proved invaluable as he almost was caught by a drowsy guard who was making his hourly routine. It took him more than 3 hours to finish his goal, but it was worth it in his eyes. One of the last rooms he slipped into his nose was embraced by a familiar and comforting scent. It was the smell of flowers, or more specifically lilacs. A smell he'd come to associate with only one person. Hinata-chan? He could see her sleeping on her bed, wrapped up snugly in her bed covers. Her face was relaxed and peaceful. It held not trace of a blush he'd always seen on her or the timid persona she possessed. Though he had always kind of thought of her as a weird, dark, and shy girl, this new Hinata seemed. Shaking his head to get his mind back on the plan, he took a deep breath and sighed. One last glance at the sleeping girl stole his resolve. He couldn't do it to her. She was just too kind to him and everyone else to have something like what he had in mind to happen to her. He shot her a rueful grin as he backed out of the room. Only one word could be used to describe the village hidden in the leaves the next morning: chaotic. Scattered throughout the leaf village was nearly the entire Hyuga clan's clothing and undergarments. They were thrown about the streets, in alleyways, on top of buildings, and even hanging mockingly in trees. While the villagers and Hyuga clan were busy trying to handle the situation, most of the shinobi populace was chasing a near-hyperventilating prankster from one side of Konoha to the other and back. If they weren't busy from collecting their clothing, the Hyuga would have most assuredly thrown a lot more than glares at the blonde as he passed them. Finally, with nearly 4 full squads of Chunin, Jounin, and Anbu surrounding him, Naruto was cornered. He was on his hands and knees, struggling to breathe. But his short of breath didn't come from the rigorous chase and escape he'd just been in. "How could you do that to the Hyuga clan, Naruto?" snapped an aggravated Chunin dangerously. "Because they're fucking bastards, baka," he shot back. Unsteadily, he climbed to his feet with his infamous foxy grin. "That may be so," a Jounin said to his side. "But that doesn't justify your actions." Uzumaki, an Anbu said with a clear order in his voice. "You're going to the Sandaime, now come quietly and your punishment be reduced." "No way!" Naruto yelled, his foxy grin widened noticeably. It automatically put the shinobi on edge. This was the perfect time, he realized, to test his first original jutsu. "I haven't tested my first jutsu." "You'll love it!" Forming the Ohitsuji seal, his grin covered his face. Enveloped in his chakra, he cried out, "Oiroku no jutsu!" In a burst of smoke, the most beautiful blonde girl they'd ever seen appeared. She had slender limbs, a pair of long ponytails, dazzling blue eyes, and her whisker marks just added a seductiveness to her that made her seem to just be dripping with sexiness. But what really caught their attentions was the fact that she was totally nude before them and didn't seem to mind showing off her rather substantial assets. They were not expecting this. Thus, since all the shinobi were males, no one was there to stop the blonde boy when he took off again. This time, there was no mistaking the loud, irritating laughter that echoed across the village for the rest of the morning. It seems all things have a silver lining, even punishments. In Naruto's case, it was learning the fastest routes to the summit of the Hokage monument. That had been the punishment for the Hyuga incident, to scrub the monument every evening for the next 3 months. Now, to celebrate the end of his probation, he pulled easily the most infamous of all pranks ever. He put graffiti all over the past Kage's faces. As if it were a repeat from several months earlier, the blonde was once again being chased throughout Konoha. But this time it was only by a pair of Chunin. While he was enjoying the chase, the blonde was also having an almost unholy amount of fun thanks to 2 of his latest jutsus. When the Chunin pair first started chasing him, he inhaled deeply, then blew a dense smokescreen around himself. Once they lost sight of him, he took off running. But they found him easily enough due to his ridiculously loud voice as he laughed off the simplicity of his escape. Then Chunin were almost on him when he put his second jutsu to work. It surrounded his body in a haze of chakra and blurred his image. This made it extremely difficult for the pair to grab onto him. "Naruto!" one of them yelled. "Get back here! When I get my hands on you!" "You've crossed the line this time, Naruto!" the other yelled, purposely interrupting his partner. "Give it up! You're just bent because you don't have the guts to do what I did, do ya? Losers! Wannabes! Taking the chase up into the air and the taller buildings, Naruto yelled out mockingly at them as he rebounded off a building and sailed right between the pair. You'll never catch me. Landing briefly, he dodged around a corner and vanished from sight. The Chunin were only a hair's breadth away, sailing around the corner while yelling at the energetic blonde. Once the pair disappeared over a building, a small tarp lowered from its position on the wall. Chuckling once again at the simplicity of his escape, Naruto proudly proclaimed, "That was too easy." "Oh yeah, Naruto!" A familiar, angry voice snapped in his ear. Yelping in shock and reflexively jumping several feet in the air, Naruto collapsed on the ground. Facing the man who'd snuck up on him, he gave him irritated glare. "Where'd you come from, Iruka-sensei? What are you doing here?" "No, what are you doing here?" Iruka snapped, pointing his finger in Naruto's face threateningly. "You're supposed to be class." Iruka was giving him another lecture. But Naruto, as usual, wasn't even trying to pay attention. Instead, he put on a big show of pouting like a baby in front of the class from his bound position on the floor. Apparently this didn't sit too well with Iruka, and he did the same thing that most teachers do to inspire cooperation among teammates. "Fine, because you missed it, Naruto," he said with finality in his voice. "Everyone in class shall review the Henji no Jutsu." This got a chorus of groans and complaints from the class instantly. Untying the blonde, Iruka sent back with his classmates as they gathered in the front of the classroom. Truth be told, Iruka had been planning on reviewing this jutsu with class for several days now. Naruto's prank seemed as good of an excuse as any to use. Most of the students were acceptable with the skill, but he didn't want to send his students out into the shinobi world with only an acceptable skill level. Of course, several students were unusually talented. Sakura was the most talented, it seemed, thanks to her near-perfect chakra control. When it came time for Naruto's turn, he could clearly see the irritated glint in his usually bright, happy eyes. Thanks to years of teaching the blonde, Iruka saw the faint warning signs that he was going to do something. The small foxy grin on his face only reinforced this. Silently watching her blonde crush as he made his way forward, Hinata timidly poked her index fingers together. A faint blush was visible as usual while she watched and silently cheered for him. "Henji no Jutsu," Naruto said, as his chakra surrounded him. In a poof of smoke, a very beautiful blonde girl stood in his place. She blew a kiss at Iruka as she winked innocently. Even though he'd heard of this, Iruka was still not prepared for it, and was sent flying from a massive burst of blood. Dropping the henge, Naruto's loud laughter echoed through the quiet room. "Gotcha!" he laughed. "That's my Oroku no Jutsu." "Cut the stupid tricks!" the young teacher yelled in his face. "This is your last warning." Class had a rather peculiar air about it today. Anxiety was so thick that it was almost visible to the naked eye. Yet an undercurrent of excitement and determination gave the atmosphere a definite charge. The only time this happened was when the class was taking a significant test. But this time it was 10 times worse, their genin exams. Thus far they had been tested on taijutsu, weapons accuracy, basic genjutsu, and first aid. But this was after an hour-long written test on shinobi laws of conduct, common courtesy, and interactions with another shinobi village. Sakura aced the written test easily, with Sasuke only a few points behind. But for the more practical test, Sasuke lived up to his reputation of being the #1 rookie. If he'd have wanted, he knew for a fact that he could have aced the written test and come near the top for the second half. But as it were, he was more content to score average. After all, it was just too troublesome to do more than that. While watching clouds was far more alluring, he also decided it would prove to be worth his time to run mental estimate of who would get what grade to pass or fail. It was almost too easily to guess on almost everyone, except for Naruto. Shikamaru had always been a little more observant than the others, perhaps due to his cloud-watching pastime. Due to this, he felt sure that he knew why the blonde always failed. He wasn't focused on his studies in the academy, or even all those pranks. No, he was much more interested in developing his own jutsus and abilities for some unknown but obsessive reason. It wasn't a matter of ability that held him back either, for only an exceptionally skilled stealth and scouting specialist could perform so many pranks, and usually escape unscathed. And due to his pranks, Shikamaru knew Naruto was smart. The ingeniousness in some of his pranks proved it. Sighing in defeat at the surprisingly complex puzzle that was the dead last, Shikamaru returned his attention to Choji. The pudgy boy was proudly detailing his exam in between chewing a bag of potato chips. Too bad he didn't share the same simple-mindedness as his lifelong friend, he mused. Or else he wouldn't have an approaching headache. Though he never admitted if the Nara boy told him his theories, Naruto's rather poor grades came from exactly those reasons. When he was younger he made such an attempt at being a screw-up that it actually began to become a part of his personality, as far as the academy was concerned. His true focus had been on making his own jutsus. While he himself didn't exactly know the reason for his obsessive research and creation of the techniques, he had a fair idea where it came from. He was an orphan with no clan. So no one was there to teach him jutsus that only family knew. It drove him to almost a depressed mind frame whenever he thought about the special training almost all his classmates got, but not him. So he felt an irresistible urge to create jutsus that he could proudly yell out were his and his alone. Yet his lack of focus cost him to fail the last 2 genin exams. So far, he'd done hardly any better than last time. When Irika announced that the final exam was the Bushin no Jutsu, Naruto almost caused an embarrassing scene. He had to clamp his hands over his mouth to stop from screaming in frustration. He could not perform that simple ninjutsu if his life depended on it, like there was some cosmic deity that was preventing him from even doing it properly. Now, as he stood before Irika and the new academy sensei Mizuki, he had a deep frown on his face. It was now or never if he could get that jutsu right. His gathered chakra perfectly visible to the naked eye as he concentrated hard on pouring an excessive amount into his hand seals. Bushin no Jutsu, he called out as the chakra exploded around him and kicked up a cloud of smoke. When it cleared, there were 2 Naruto, but the difference between them was like night and day. One was the real, while the clone was a sickly pale white and lying dead on the floor. A second of silence greeted Naruto's nervous, twitching body. He knew it was coming, especially the way that Irika's eyebrow was twitching. Then, "You fail." He sat on the only swing in the academy yard, in the shade of the trees. His face was sullen and his eyes were downcast. Leaning his head against the swing's rope, he was the perfect picture of dejection. Across the yard was a large group of children who had passed their genin exams, and their parents stood proudly at their sides, congratulating them while boasting to other parents. He watched them with a deepening hollow feeling in his stomach. The loneliness was getting worse these days. It wouldn't be long before he did something that would either make him or the villagers crack. All he wanted was a real friend, someone to talk and laugh with on a regular basis. Sure, Irika seemed to be doing a good job at that, but he was still Naruto's sensei. There was only so much time he could spare on the blonde. Placing his goggles onto his forehead, he was about to get up to leave when he sensed someone suddenly appear near him. Looking up in the tree, he saw Mizuki-sensei looking down at him with what could almost be considered a calculating gaze. But it quickly vanished as a kind smile lit up the man's face. Mizuki watched the blonde run off, his cheerful attitude once again restored. When the boy was safely out of sight, his gaze darkened considerably as a wicked grin of anticipation appeared. The blonde boy had been surprisingly easy to convince. He didn't know whether to be relieved or worried about the ease of it. But he settled for relief. After all, he was Chunin and that demon vessel's body probably was too weak to wield the awesome powers of the kitsune once held. This thought had his sneer turning malicious. The Kyuubi seemed to have lost its memory, or it was biding its time, waiting for the right time to return. Whatever the reason, Mizuki was sure that the situation was safely in his control. His plan was ingenious. He hadn't spent the last year mesmerizing the schedules of the comings and goings at the Hokage Tower, searching for the exact location of the Forbidden Scroll, and finding a plausible explanation as to how it could suddenly go missing. It was Naruto's poor grades and his loud mouth that drew Mizuki's attention. The Kyuubi wanted to be Hokage, huh? Well, the fact that his abilities were the weakest of the academy students pretty much guaranteed that he'd fail. The kitsune must be getting desperate to become a shinobi now. What better way to gain its trust than to stand up for it during its failed attempt in the exam, and then telling it of a secret way to pass? Mizuki warned him not to try to retrieve the scroll until late at night, just to make it easier on his part of getting it. It would be a long few hours before he could safely make his move at getting what should have been his birthright. But in the meantime, he could plan out how he would deal with the Kyuubi when the time came. Nobody would miss him. He was just the human form of the demon fox. Chuckling sinisterly under his breath, Mizuki turned and headed back to the academy. He may not be staying in the village for much longer, but he couldn't afford to blow his cover just yet. It was well past midnight. He was sitting on the ground in front of an old warehouse in the middle of the forest, almost a mile from Konoha. In his lap was a very large and heavy scroll. Gently, almost respectfully, he untied the ropes that held it shut and its secrets hidden from the world. Unrolling it across his lap, he gazed upon it with wide eyes. The thrill of learning a powerful jutsu that no one his age could possibly know was enough to drive him ecstatic. But as he read the name of the first jutsu, his excitement died like it had been squashed by a bug. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he said quietly. Taju? That meant mass, while Kage was shadow, but Bunshin could only mean. Yelling out in disbelief at this ridiculous coincidence, he groaned out, "Not this again." It's my worst jutsu. He really didn't want to learn this technique, but Mizuki-sensei said that any technique would do. Maybe this technique was different from the one they thought in the academy. As this thought passed his mind, he grew certain of it. Why else would it be in the Forbidden Scroll if it wasn't different? Reading the brief explanation of the jutsu that was next to its name, he stared in disbelief. Then a sly, foxy grin broke across his face. If he could master this jutsu, he'd never lose to Sasuke again, and the title of Hokage would most assuredly be his in a few years. With a renewed determination, Naruto quickly set about learning what would soon become his early trademark jutsu. It was nearing morning, a faint violet appearing on the eastern horizon. The blond boy was sitting in a hunched posture and was panting heavily. The stolen scroll was strapped to his back and seemed to be weighing him down as he fought to catch his breath. This was how Iruka found Naruto. The blonde looked up in surprise when he heard the scarred sensei land near him. Iruka chuckled almost menacingly as he bent over the boy. "It's all over," he said with that voice that he always used when Naruto was about to get in serious trouble. Instead of noticing his sensei's dangerous expression, Naruto closed his eyes and chuckled good-naturedly. His legs wobbled slightly as he stood up, scratching the back of his head nervously. "Got me already?" he said, slightly disappointed. "You're quick, sensei. I only had time to learn 2 techniques." Standing up, Iruka peered quizzically at his blonde student. Sweat was glistening from his face, and his legs seemed just barely able to contain the strength to hold him up. He had only seen Naruto like this when he was training. He's been out here practicing, he realized. I can tell how hard he's been working. "Listen, sensei," Naruto said suddenly, his grin large. "I'm going to show you one of my amazing jutsus and you're going to let me graduate. That's how it works, right? Whoever learns at least one jutsu from this scroll passes." "What?" Iruka asked, confused. "Where'd you get that idea?" "Mizuki-sensei told me," Naruto said happily, practically bouncing as he felt his strength fast returning. "He told me where to find the scroll in this place." He trailed off as he noticed 2 things: Iruka's expression as he put things together, and the sudden sound of kunai rushing through the air. Hearing the sound at the same time, but reacting faster, Iruka shoved Naruto out of the way of the deadly hail of daggers. The force of the multiple kunai pushed him back against the warehouse wall. It was extremely lucky for Iruka that he'd worn his chunin flak jacket, or several of the kunai would have buried themselves in his abdomen. As it were, only one actually pierced his body, just above his right knee. "I see you've found our little hideaway," a familiar voice said from the forest canopy. Sandaime Hokage was sitting at his desk. In front of him was a crystal ball on a small cushion. He gazed steadily into its depths, watching the events in the forest commence. It had shocked him slightly to learn that Mizuki was the one really behind the theft of the Forbidden Scroll. He'd been monitoring all the Chunin, Jounin, and Anbu that were scouring the village in a desperate attempt to find the scroll. He'd been lucky that he was paying particularly close attention to Iruka. After all, the man seemed to have a knack at finding Naruto when he had done something wrong. He sighed in resignation as he listened to Mizuki's proclamation of Naruto being the Kyuubi no Kitsune. That baka didn't even know the difference between the blonde and fox. But apparently it hit Naruto harder than he thought it would. When Iruka was able to trick Mizuki, he couldn't help but smirk slightly. For all his boasts that he was superior to him, Mizuki fell for that henge quite quickly. Then, as Iruka had saved Naruto from a hail of kunai, the blonde suddenly saved Iruka from being torn apart by the traitor's shuriken. What really caught Sandaime's attention was the blonde forming a familiar cross seal that was the signature of the Kage Bunshin. The old man couldn't help but chuckle as the Kyuubi vessel filled the surrounding area with 1,000 shadow clones and Mizuki's panicked disbelief. He promptly stopped watching when all Naruto charged. The outcome was obvious. But he had another matter to attend to, informing the searching means of the scroll's safety. His small smile didn't fade as a stray thought crossed his mind. Minato's legacy was certainly living up to his expectations, being the #1 most surprising shinobi of his generation. He could see the morning's light through his closed eyelids. Even though it was covered, it was still blinding. The irritation made itself known as he let out a complaint. "Iruka-sensei, how much longer?" "Okay," the young man said quietly. "You can open your eyes now." The sight that greeted him was Iruka's smiling face. He held Naruto's goggles in one hand. But what caught the blonde's attention was his forehead was clearly visible, devoid of his headband. That's when he realized where it had disappeared to. It was tied snugly onto his own forehead. "Congratulations," Iruka said, with genuine cheer in his voice. "You graduate. And to celebrate, I have a surprise. We're going out for ramen tonight." Naruto was silent. He couldn't believe all this was happening at last. He'd finally been allowed to graduate. He finally found someone who actually believed in him. Even though he'd stolen a highly dangerous artifact from the Hokage Tower and used it, he was still allowed to become a genin. It was too much for him to put into words to describe his joy. Looking down at the blonde as the silence started to stretch, he was greeted by a loud, joyful yell. "Iruka-sensei!" rang out Naruto's happy voice in his ears as he was tackled against the tree with the boy giving him a fierce hug. Phew, that's a relief. I didn't think that I'd ever finish this chapter. But still, I'm somewhat happy as to how this chapter turned out. It's much better than what I had originally planned it to be. For those of you who are wondering what that second jutsu is that Naruto learned, here's your challenge. The person that gives me an idea of what kind of jutsu it should be, and I like it, will have the next chapter dedicated to him/her. Good luck. He sat in the classroom resting his head on his arms on the table, a wide grin on his face as a low chuckle escaped him very few moments. On his forehead was Iruka's headband, which he had spent the almost 2 hours last cleaning and polishing. He couldn't believe his incredible good luck at finally becoming a genin. In his mind's eye were the 2 jutsus that he'd mesmerized from the scroll. Kage Bunshin had been the easiest for him to learn surprisingly. It seemed that his years of studying chakra usage and manipulation had paid off. He learned the kinjutsu in less than half the time it probably could have taken him. The second kinjutsu was far harder to control because it required so much damn chakra. He could perform it at what could shakily be called the bare minimum of its true capabilities. In fact, that was the reason that Iruka found him in such exhaustion the other night. He knew that he needed to nearly triple his current chakra potency if he was going to be able to use it effectively, and not die of chakra depletion. So, he'd just have to wait to use it. Not that he was in a hurry to show off what could possibly become his hidden ace. He was pried from his examinations of his jutsu ace when a familiar voice spoke to him. "What are you doing here, Naruto?" Shikamaru asked. "This class isn't for dropouts. You can only be here if you graduated." Sitting up, Naruto tapped Iruka's leaf headband that he wore proudly. He couldn't help but to add a bit of sarcasm to his voice as he answered. "Oh yeah? See this? Open your eyes, Shikamaru, it's a regulation headband." The Nara boy scrawled at the blonde's attitude. He quickly zoned out as Naruto launched into a speech of how the headband was meant for him. But where Shikamaru hardly heard a word, Hinata was hanging on to every syllable. Her curiosity was starting to eat at her as to how he passed. She had been sure that he had failed once again. A rather loud commotion from the doorway behind her drew Naruto's attention toward her, and Shikamaru used the distraction to escape. It was almost painfully easy to determine who the girls were behind her, even without using her Byakugan. Ino and Sakura. It was especially easy to guess from the way Naruto's face started to redden. Since she was more concerned with watching Naruto, she could have sworn that he was actually looking at her. This thought brought a small blush to her face. It deepened slightly when she saw Naruto's blush get deeper. Was he actually looking at her? That question seemed to be answered when his face suddenly started moving, following Sakura's movements. He stood up and waved to her, calling a happy greeting. Her response? "Move it!" she snarled, knocking him aside. She did this so she could stand close to Sasuke as she asked in what she thought was a sweet and endearing voice. "Good morning, Sasuke, do you mind if I sit next to you?" The Uchiha heir only spared her a glance before he returned to his brooding. It was like this every morning, this routine. If it wasn't Sakura or Ino, then it was some other kunoichi wannabe. He was getting quite sickened of the repetitious behavior these girls exhibited. So he becoming a genin was an even bigger relief than he wanted to admit. Getting up with a glare, Naruto worked his way around the gathered and arguing kunoichi. With a small hop, he was landed on Sasuke's desk and squatted down. He glared at his rival, trying to see what was so special about him that made most of the girls turn into such bitches. To his eyes, all Sasuke was and would ever be was pretty boy who looked more like a girl than a shinobi. "Naruto!" Sakura snapped. "Hey, stop glaring at Sasuke!" The blonde spared the pink-haired girl a small, hurt glance. Then he promptly returned to glaring and scrutinizing the Uchiha. Sasuke returned the glare full force, making a mental note to beat the crap out of the blonde later. This glaring contest turned out to be a big mistake on both their parts as another genin hopeful accidentally bumped into Naruto. The bump, however soft, was more than enough to send the blonde face first into Sasuke's face. Though it lasted scarcely a nanosecond, that unintentional and utterly disgusting kiss was forever burned into the minds of the gathered girls. Neither boy noticed the darkening expressions of the incredibly angry and jealous kunoichi as they broke apart, and immediately started to gag like they'd been poisoned. It was only when a wave of killing desire washed over him that Naruto felt it. "Danger!" "Naruto," Sakura said in deceptively calm voice, speaking for the girls behind and beside her. "You are so dead." Most promising, young student, Uchiha Sasuke, a jounin said quietly. Gazing into the Hokage's crystal at the brooding youth, he asked, is that him? Yes, the Sandaime confirmed. He's the only survivor of the Uchiha clan, muttered Kurenai, the newest and only female jounin of the gathered shinobi. She was looking for a familiar Hyuga girl, Hinata. It had been a few years since she'd last seen the girl, having to escort her to the academy when she was younger. Though she personally didn't appreciate the kind of attention that her father gave her, she could fully understand his need for precaution, especially after that Kumogakure incident almost 10 years earlier. So she felt it her duty to continue watching over her, and she all but demanded that the Hyuga be placed on her team. That's right, Sandaime confirmed again as he sent the crystal ball in to zoom in on the other students as well. It was a practice that was started with the Shodai Hokage, showing the jounin instructors the genin hopefuls through the crystal so they'd have some idea as to what their possible students look like. As it came upon the group of gathered and bickering kunoichi, all the jounin noticed one hot-headed blonde make his way over to the Uchiha. A silver-haired jounin watched the pair's confrontation with interest since he already knew that they were on his team. A rivalry between the best in the class and the worst in class, he realized instantly, not exactly original. With an unnoticed sigh, he suppressed the memories of his long-past teammate. They had been rivals, but ultimately friends in the end. He found himself not exactly looking forward to interacting with this group as he could already tell that they'd stir up a lot of unwanted memories. As usual, Sandaime said, more to himself than the others. He sighed in resignation as he watched the kunoichi beat on a thoroughly terrified blonde. Naruto's right in the middle of some kind of trouble. Hokage-sama, said one of the jounin. Is it really wise to let that boy become a shinobi? What could be wrong with it? Sandaime asked, feeling a slight headache approaching. He knew that this was coming. It pained him to know that even a jounin couldn't tell the difference between Naruto and Kyuubi. He has shown exceptional skills, as I'm sure you've heard of his victory over Mizuki. And it remains up to his jounin instructor to pass him or not. The jounin nodded, accepting the silent order to drop the subject. A three-man squad? This was the collective thought of various genin hopefuls throughout the room. As whispers erupted around the room, many guessing as to who would be paired with who, Ino smirked. It was destiny that she'd be placed with her Sasuke-kun. They were meant for each other. It didn't matter who their third teammate was as long as she could be with Sasuke, preferably alone. Well, someone's gotta be in Sasuke's group, she said down to Sakura who sat a row beneath her, between a still brooding Sasuke and a severely bruised Naruto. I wonder who? She left the sentence hanging. I don't know, Sakura said simply, almost nonchalantly. Glancing back at her once best friend and current rival, she felt her inner Sakura flare up. Duh. I'm gonna be with Sasuke, so stay away from him, you hag. I wanna be with Naruto was having a hard time deciding who he wanted his third teammate to be, since he already knew who he wanted to be with. Well, I don't care, as long as it's not Sasuke team. Grunting in disgust at this unfortunate discovery, Sasuke had only one thought on his mind. Groups of 3? That'd only slow me down. As Iruka began announcing the teams, the class was strangely silent. That is until the kids whose names were already been called started talking amongst each other. But that changed with the arrival of Team 7, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto lifted his head at the sound of his name. Haruno Sakura. After a second's pause, Naruto let out a loud victory cry as Sakura's face fell in depression. And Uchiha Sasuke. In a flash, the blonde and pink-haired teammates' positions were switched, Sakura giving out a victorious yelp and Naruto's face fell as deep depression set in. I won't be with Naruto-kun then, was Hinata's saddened realization. She couldn't help but stare at his drooping head, feeling an urge to rush down there to comfort him. But she couldn't do that. He'd think she was probably some stalker or something. Now, Team 8, Hyuga Hinata. She returned her attention to Iruka and quietly acknowledged her fate. Inuzuka Kiba, the said boy, chuckled at finally being called, more than happy at being paired with his beloved Hinata-chan. And Aburaim Shino. The said boy merely adjusted his sunglasses. Turning back to Ino, Sakura chuckled deviously as she shot her rival a victory V. Her smirk was large and promised to grow in size at the blonde's disbelief and anger. How did you get in his group? She could barely stop herself from yelling that question. Sakura didn't answer, but inner Sakura was cheering, cha-ching. True love conquers all. As Ino was growling and trying to restrain herself from wringing the pink-haired girl's neck, a familiar voice drawled out next to her. I don't get it, Shikamura said. What do you see in a guy like that? He's not so special. Looking at him in exasperation, she said the first thing that came to her mind. You are so beyond clueless, Shikamaru. Don't you get it? Glancing at her with a slightly jealous and annoyed look, he stated the obvious, "No, I don't get it because I'm not a girl." Seeing the jealousy in his gaze and voice, Ino sighed. A small smirk pulled at her lips at the thought that Shikamaru would be jealous over Sasuke having her attentions than him. Like he thought that she was better off with him than the aloof and mysterious Uchiha. "You are so full of yourself," she muttered, leaning her cheek into her palm. "Jealousy is a terrible thing. I'd hate to be on your team." It was at this time that Iruka's voice caught their attention again with the sounds of their names. Team 10, Yamanaka Ino, Naro Shikamaru, and Akimichi Choji. Surprised and slightly angered at this revelation, Ino stared at Iruka. Next to her, Shikamaru couldn't help but chuckle as he threw her words back at her. "Didn't you say something about hating to be on my team?" "Those are all the squads," their sensei said. He'd been holding it since the declaration of Team 7, only out of respect for the remaining teams that needed to be announced. Now that he was done, Naruto felt it was time to change his team or to at least get his questions answered. "Iruka-sensei," he called, standing up in the process and pointing accusingly at Sasuke. "Why does a great shinobi like me have to be in the same group as a slug like Sasuke?" Naruto pointedly ignored Sakura's dangerous glare at insinuating that her Sasuke-kun was weaker than him. No, he was far more concerned with getting his answer. It seemed that Iruka had been expecting this question, so it only took half a second to answer. Sasuke had the best overall scores of all the graduating students. Placing his arms on his hips, he continued, "Naruto, you had the worst scores." This brought a series of chuckles and laughter from the other genin hopefuls. Ignoring them, Iruka continued, "To create a balanced group, we put the best student with the worst student." If Naruto had a reply for that, he didn't get to voice it as Sasuke spoke up for the first time that day. "Just make sure you don't get in my way, Baka." He didn't degrade himself to look at the dobe. Forgetting about ordering Iruka to switch him with someone else, he turned to Sasuke with an angry yell. "Hey! What did you say?" There was no way that self-centered Uchiha said that he'd get in his way. "Hard of hearing?" Sasuke asked, indifferent to Naruto's anger. This brought another wave of laughter from the class. "Sit down, Naruto!" Sakura snapped, sick him pestering Sasuke and interrupting her time with him. Clearing throat loudly, Iruka dismissed the class until after lunch. He watched as the members of the new Team 7 quickly exited the room, led by Sasuke with Sakura trailing him closely, followed by Naruto. Iruka couldn't help but think forlorn thoughts. If these first few hours are any indication of the team's future, it isn't looking too good at the moment. "Sasuke, where are you?" Sakura called out, in what she thought was a sweet and innocent voice. She felt a little hurt that he left as soon as they were dismissed. Didn't he want to spend time with her now that they on the same team? Lunch together would have been a great starting point. Right. As these thoughts were going through her mind, she heard a voice that she made her cringe. Oh, how she hated that dobe's very existence. "Hey, Sakura?" he called cheerfully as he walked up to her. "I was thinking that since we're on the same team, we could have lunch together and get to know each other better." It was one thing to be followed. It was another that her follower had just mirrored her thoughts. The fact that it was Naruto who was following her had any kind of sweet notions she had turned sour instantly. "Why would I have lunch with you?" she demanded accusingly. "How could that thought even cross your mind?" If her tone had hurt his feelings, she didn't see it through his expert mask. The fact that she could only see his irritating face still in a smile tickled the anger she'd been harboring all morning. "But we're in the same group and I just thought." "Naruto," she interrupted with a dangerous tone of voice and deadly glare. "You're annoying." Glaring at him for only another moment, she turned and brought her hands up. Calling out in her sweet and innocent voice again, she tried to adopt a similar look on her face. "Sasuke? Where are you?" He had half a mind to go after her and try to ask her to have lunch again. But she just called him annoying, like he was nothing but a pest or a bug that she'd so much rather squash but couldn't seem to catch. Though he didn't show it, she had hurt his feelings. Later, he sat up on one of the academy's roofs, sulking. He had finally gotten to become a genin, and what happens? Sasuke teams on the same team. Not only that, but with his true skills safely hidden and his refusal to show them yet, he couldn't do anything more than play the part that he created years ago. "There's got to be a way to deal with," he grumbled. Then a blue shirt by an open window attracted his attention. It was the team, eating his rice ball lunch. The bastard thought he was so cool because he didn't hide his skills and everyone else respected them. If only he could be dropped down a few notches, no, a few dozen notches, then he might be a bit more bearable of a teammate. Then inspiration struck him. "Got it," he said as a devious grin crossed his face. Alright, Ino said in a foul mood. If we're in the same team, then you've got to follow my lead. That's the only way it'll work. Chewing absent-mindedly on his rice ball, Shikamaru muttered out an annoyed acknowledgement. They sat together out on one of the balconies near the roof. It had a pretty good view of the village, which was why Shikamaru and Choji liked it so much. Ino had taken it upon herself to follow them and instill a leadership role among them. Not that he'd raise a finger against her leadership as long as it wasn't a clear mistake. It was still going to be annoying as hell because the blonde was such a control freak. A small movement on the academy wall beneath them a fair ways drew his attention. If it weren't for the familiar blonde hair, he would have had a tough time identifying it as Naruto. Not when he wore a gray uniform similar to what Chunin and Jounin wore. Naruto, Shikamaru said quietly, identifying the blonde. This statement drew Ino's attention. They watched as the blonde snuck across the wall, silent as a shadow. The blonde seemed to be heading for the open window where Sasuke stood. Shikamaru had to admit to himself that if it weren't for the blonde's hair, he probably wouldn't have noticed him, especially with the clothes he wore seemed to blend into the academy wall. The pair watched as Naruto suddenly and silently hopped through the window, startling the Uchiha. The movement jarred the window's support strut, and it closed behind the blonde. They faintly heard Sasuke's warning growl and Naruto's pipe down. Naruto, Ino said angrily. If you so much as scratch him, you're on my enemy list forever. Shikamaru spared her another exasperated glance as the sound of severe beating erupted from behind the closed window. They waited impatiently to see what happened. Then, almost as soon as it started, Sasuke opened the window and hopped out. He smirked as he stood and walked away. Shikamaru was a little disappointed. He was sure that Naruto would have put up more of a fight. Especially when it seemed that he was training himself outside of school. Maybe he just wasn't as talented as Shikamaru gave him credit for? He beat Naruto without even breaking a sweat, he muttered to himself. What did you expect? Ino asked. She was quite proud of her dear Sasuke. It slightly surprised Shikamaru that he'd spoken out loud without realizing it. Naruto against my boy Sasuke? No contest. As he continued to watch Sasuke walk away, he suddenly felt something out of place. Why would Sasuke walk away on the roof? Surely, he could have just taken the stairs, right? And where was Naruto? He knew that the blonde seemed more resilient than anyone else. So shouldn't he be up and around by now? That's when it struck him. The Sasuke walking away on the roof wasn't really Sasuke. It was Naruto. A slight smirk crossed his face at this realization. So he hadn't underestimated the dobe after all. It had taken him surprisingly longer than he thought it would take. But he didn't finally get himself untied from the unbelievably tight knots that the dobe restrained him with. How could that baka possibly perform the Kage Bunshin while utilizing the Kawarimi and some other jutsu he'd never seen before? What happened to the dobe who couldn't even perform a simple Bunshin? What was that strange technique he used? Just after Naruto had used the Kawarimi and the Kage Bunshins were going to attack, all of the Naruto had formed the Tora seal and blew out a dense cloud of smoke. It was then easy pickings for the blondes to tackle and tie him down. Where did that dobe learn such a strange jutsu? If the Tora seal was required, then it must have been some fire jutsu. But the Uchiha clan specialized in Katon jutsu, and he'd realized he'd never seen a smokescreen used in the clan before it was destroyed. Did the dobe create that jutsu? He just couldn't imagine the baka being able to do that. Yet there was no other explanation. After confronting a badly blushing and rambling Sakura, he walked back to the classroom since the lunch break was close to being over. When a door was thrown open ahead of him, he saw the blonde boy rushing out, once again dressed in his orange jumpsuit. Yelping in surprise, he skidded to a stop a few feet away from Sasuke. Crouching down, as if believing that Sasuke would suddenly attack, which he was seriously considering, the boy demanded, "Sasuke, what are you doing here? How did you get loose?" "I used the escape jutsu," he said, smirking at the blonde's angry expression. He decided to provoke the boy's anger, since he decided to vent his own anger. "Nothing to it. It's a very basic technique. Why did you do that, Henjin to me?" Glaring at the Uchiha, he growled out, "I thought it would be fun to try out my jutsus on you, so I did." He formed a familiar cross seal, and in a poof of smoke, 5 Narutos were in the air and diving for him while forming the Tora seal. Grunting in aggravation, he made his annoyance known. "The same jutsu again?" "Last time I went easy on you," one Naruto snapped. "This time you're going down for the count. Get ready, Sasuke." Then 5 loud groans from the blonde's stomachs roared through the hallway. The boys dropped unceremoniously to the ground, each clutching his stomach while grunting, groaning, and yelling about it. Then they turned and ran for the restroom that was behind them. With 5 blondes trying to force their way through the single doorway at once, A bottleneck was formed and they immediately started shoving and pushing each other to get inside as quickly as they could. What a loser, Sasuke muttered as he turned around and took the long way back to the classroom. He's late, Naruto whined as the second hour passed. He had his head stuck out through the door, continuously glancing down the hallway impatiently. Sasuke and Sakura, though their pride would never allow them to admit it, both were silently complaining and agreeing with the blonde. Naruto, just sit down, Sakura said, quite bored. I don't want to, he said, turning back inside the room. Sasuke ignored the blonde's ranting and wondered yet again how it could have happened. He was best student in class and Naruto was the worst. The outcome should have been obvious. But where the dobe couldn't even do a simple bunshin only 2 days ago, he now knew how to do the Kinjutsu Kage bunshin. It just didn't make sense to him. How could the dobe not be able to perform the bunshin at all, yet pull several Kage bunshins out of his ass without dropping from chakra depletion? His silent musings were cut short as Naruto grabbed an eraser and chair toward the doorway. Wedging the eraser between the door frame and the door, the blonde's chuckle sounded a tad bit like an evil crackle. Hey, what are you doing? Sakura demanded, moving closer for a better view. That's what he gets for coming late, Naruto announced proudly. Hopping off the chair, he let out a triumphant yell of surprise, and quickly placed the chair back in its original spot. You're asking for trouble, Sakura said, very much like a goody-goody. You know you shouldn't do that. That's what she said to Naruto, but inside it was a totally different story. Her inner and aggressive side was cringing with anticipation. I love stuff like this. Though he really didn't care, Sasuke felt he should state the obvious to his oblivious teammate. Our sensei is a jounin, an elite shinobi. Do you really think that he'll fall for that? Yeah, Sakura said, agreeing with her crush instantly. You're so clueless, Naruto. At that moment, the doors slid open and the eraser landed solidly on the clump of silver hair. There was a second of total silence as the four of them realized what had happened. Then, all hell broke loose. The next instant Naruto's loud laughter erupted with a victory cheer. I got him. He totally fell for it. Hee. Gomen, sensei, Sakura said, trying to appear innocent and thoroughly embarrassed for him. I told him not to do it, but he wouldn't listen. I'd never do something like that. Perfect shot. Inner Sakura cheered, giving Naruto 2 thumbs up. Even Sasuke was found himself questioning the man's ability. Picking up the eraser, the man stared at it for a moment before entering a thinking pose. Then, more to himself than the genin team, he said, my first impression of this group, you're a bunch of idiots. The pink-haired girl was obviously openly smitten with the last Uchiha. She clearly held him in the highest regard, and would probably support him whether he was right or wrong on any issue. Yet, at the same time, she seemed to have inherited the village's disgust of her blonde teammate. Though it seemed that her disgust was directed more toward him being a clueless idiot than what the village hated him for. The Uchiha was aloof and quiet. He didn't seem to care what happened around him, or his new teammates, or what anyone thought of him. His focus, as Kakashi had guessed long ago, was entirely on killing his older brother. Of course, he did seem to be unusually aggressive to the blonde, like he was taking their unofficial rivalry seriously despite him having the clear advantage. Almost like a sibling rivalry. The blonde seemed unusually easy to decipher at a first glance. He wore a happy-go-lucky grin at all times, had a crush on Sakura, and seemed to take his rivalry with Sasuke just as seriously. Yet, as he introduced himself, Kakashi felt something was out of place. This perspective was largely thanks to years of seeing underneath the underneath. Sure, what the blonde was saying was no doubt true, but it seemed like he was either withholding information or playing a role like an actor. This second assumption of his only increased when Sakura declared her disgust of him. It had taken him nearly a second to react, like he was taking in the information, processing it, then remembering how he needed to act or react. Deciding to put off openly asking the blonde right then and there, after all the answers would come eventually right, Kakashi had explained to them the survival exercise they'd be having. No matter how many genin teams he'd explained this part to, he'd never get over the hilarity of their reactions. It was now 9 in the morning. Kakashi was hidden in the tree cover near the training field his genin team was to report to. He'd been there from the start, watching them as they arrived. Okay, maybe he wasn't watching them exactly but reading his newest volume of Aika Aika Paradise. Besides, it certainly was fun to be terminally late all the time, like Obito always was. After years of copying his dead teammate, Kakashi could finally proclaim with heartfelt honesty that it was very fun to be late and make horrible excuses. Especially the way it always, without fail, irritated everyone around him. Glancing at the sun and deciding that he was sufficiently late, he replaced the book back into his pouch. With a poof of smoke, he appeared on the field near his waiting team. "Yo," he called, with a raised hand. "You're late." Two angry genin yelled at him while the third glared. "Well, a black cat crossed my path," Kakashi said, not bothering trying to hide his smile. Oh, he loved this part. "So I had to take the long way." All the kids just glared at him, instantly seeing through the lie. Naruto and Sakura growled dangerously at him, just itching to beat him into pulp. Oh, he loved his job. Shinobi must be able to conceal their movements and hide effectively. That was one of the most ingrained teachings of the academy into their students. That class was covered more thoroughly than the class of learning to throw kunai or shuriken. After a week-long training session, the academy students were given the task of sneaking from one side of Konoha to the other without being caught by the shinobi planted in among the ranks of the civilians. Many students were eventually caught because they grew careless or reckless. But not Sakura or Sasuke. They now demonstrated how well they'd been taught as they followed Kakashi as he moved to a new clearing by a river. While he could easily detect their chakra levels, he couldn't see them at all. They had indeed been very well trained. Too bad Naruto didn't seem to be in the mind frame of hiding. He appeared in front of Kakashi in a blur and stood proudly on the other end of the field. He had his arms crossed over his chest in what he obviously thought of as his cool pose. "You and me, right now, fair and square," the blonde yelled out. "Let's go." Kakashi threw him an exasperated look. His opinion on the blonde's behavior was summed up perfectly by Sasuke's muttered comment. "Fool." "You know," Kakashi said, "compared to the others, you're a little weird." Huffing arrogantly, Naruto snapped, "Oh yeah? The only thing weird here is your haircut." With that being said, he rushed at the man. Lazily reaching into his bag, Kakashi sighed. This was going to be boring, he was sure. So he might as well do something worthwhile with his time. Seeing his sensei reaching into his pouch had the blonde stopped dead in his tracks, giving the man a suspicious gaze. This look intensified as it became clear he had grabbed something. "Shinobi Battle Tactics, Part 1, Kakashi said, sounding like a textbook. "Taijutsu, the physical part." "Taijutsu? Then why is he reaching for a weapon?" Naruto wondered as he prepared to snatch a kunai to defend him. But he wasn't prepared for what his sensei finally pulled out a book. "What the?" was Naruto's ever-so-intelligent remark. "What are you waiting for?" Kakashi said as he started reading, ignoring the blonde. "Make a move." Stuttering slightly as he tried to sum up his thoughts, Naruto found he recognized that book that Kakashi was reading. It was Aika Aika Paradise, a perverted adult book. The fact that his sensei was openly reading it in front of them confounded him slightly. Finally he managed to get out, "Why are you reading that book?" "Why?" the silver-haired man repeated. "To find out what happens in the story. Of course, don't let it bother you. With your weak attacks, it really wouldn't matter if I were reading or whatever." That struck a nerve. Kakashi-sensei didn't respect him, huh? Well, he'd just have to make him respect him, especially when he was going to become Hokage in a few years. The anger at being immediately being labeled as weak before his sensei even took a single punch from him really pissed him off. Far more than Sasuke could have hoped to, that was for sure. "I'm gonna crush you!" he screamed as he charged forward and leapt. Despite throwing a punch with all his might, he was stopped cold by Kakashi's hand. What really ticked him off was the fact that he didn't even look up from his book. Landing lightly, he was quick to jump up and throw a powerful kick at his sensei's waist. The jounin merely crouched down swiftly and the kick sailed over his head, barely touching his hair. And he still didn't look up. Backing up, Naruto crouched down for a second and formed the Torai hand seal. Nothing appeared to have happened until he rushed forward again. This time his image was hazy. Out of the corner of his eye all Kakashi saw was an orange haze quickly approaching him. From their hiding places, Sakura and Sasuke stared in surprise at this. What was it that the baka had just done? They'd been far from impressed when the fight initially started, now they were quite interested. Sakura, from her vantage point, had been the only one to see the hand seal that Naruto formed, so she knew why his body was hazy. But how could he do that? She didn't know of any jutsus that could do that. "Now you're mine!" Naruto yelled as his fist closed in on Kakashi. But that was a mistake. Using his voice as a means of figuring his exact location, Kakashi darted around behind him. He got a small grin on his face as he formed the Tora seal. He had to suppress a chuckle as Naruto stopped dead and stared at the spot where he used to be. "Don't let your enemy get behind you all the time," Kakashi said quietly. Recognizing the danger of the Tora seal, Sakura threw stealth to the winds as she yelled out, "Naruto! Get out of there! Quick! He's going to destroy you!" Looking over the direction that he'd heard her voice, he heard another voice directly behind him. Too late. All the blonde could do was glance back in time to see Kakashi bringing the Tora seal up and thrusting it up his butt. Kanahigaku Furei Taijutsu no Ugi, Senin Garoshi. With a burst of chakra and Naruto's own natural reflex, the blonde was sent flying through the air with an undignified scream of pain and embarrassment. This jutsu had Sakura and Sasuke staring at Kakashi with disgust as they realized the hand seal wasn't even a hand seal. The man merely returned to reading his book. Then a pair of shuriken erupted from the water and raced at Kakashi. As the man made to catch the weapons, they suddenly exploded and were replaced by a pair of Kage Bunshins. Glancing up in surprise, Kakashi was rewarded with a fist in the face and another in the gut. But before the Bunshins could do more damage, he swept his leg up and around and crushed them. Walking over to the river as a blonde head surfaced, he absently rubbed his aching jaw. That had actually hurt. Sputtering as he climbed onto shore, Naruto glared up his sensei. But that glare died as he saw him rubbing his jaw. Standing up weakly, he grinned viciously. That was for nailing me the butt. You're looking awfully confident for someone can barely stand, Kakashi observed. I suppose using Kage Bunshin drains your reserves much quicker than I thought. What do you expect when I'm starving to death, Baka-sensei? He yelled. But that's not going to stop me because I'm going to be Hokage one day, believe it? Then 6 more orange blurs leapt out of the river and shouted at the same time, emphasizing the point, I will become a shinobi. The fact that the blonde was using the same jutsu saddened Kakashi somewhat. He'd always been hearing of how the blonde was an ingenious prankster. But it didn't seem like that part of him carried over into his shinobi skills. Still, genin or not, he was forced to put his book back in his bag with a defeated sigh since he would likely need both hands. You can't beat me with this jutsu, Naruto, he said as the 7 blondes charged him. Then something happened that truly caught him by surprise. Something jumped onto him from behind. Glancing back, he caught sight of a clump of blonde hair. An 8 clone? Then 6 others grabbed onto his legs as he was distracted by the Naruto on his back. Didn't you say don't let your enemy get behind you? The blondes asked as he watched the final Naruto jump high into the air. Good advice, sensei. Get ready to see my best creations. The Naruto in the air yelled as all of them formed the Tora seal. What was going on? Kakashi wondered. No way that they can use a fire jutsu, even a low-level one, when they so close. But he watched in surprise as all the Narutos took a huge breath of air. Okay, maybe he will. Just as he was ready to use the Kawarimi jutsu, he saw the Naruto exhale a cloud of smoke. The smoke wasn't toxic, but he couldn't see anything. Not even when something hit him hard in the stomach. Utilizing his superior strength, Kakashi broke free of the Bunshins and leapt high and far from the smokescreen. Gotcha! 3 voices yelled from around him. The 3 Narutos were converging on him, and since he was suspended in the air, he couldn't necessarily react to dodge them. So he did the only thing he could do. Kawarimi no Jutsu. From his new vantage point in a tree, he watched as the 3 Naruto destroyed the clone he'd switched with. Dropping to the ground, the Naruto looked amongst one another, and then silently the Bunshin disappeared. KUSO! Naruto yelled to the sky, trying to vent his frustration. So the prankster has a temper problem? This thought brought a smirk to the Jounin's face as a devious idea came to him. Using his incredible speed, he quickly set up a double-layered snare trap using one of the bells as bait. The gleam of the bell caught the blonde's attention easily. Kakashi's smirk grew as he watched the blonde jump to conclusions and run for the bell. But just as he was about to trip the first trap, the blonde hesitated for a second. Then he merely placed his foot 3 inches to left of where it would have landed and snatched up the bell. This surprised Kakashi. The blonde had seen the double-layered trap. Nice try, Baka-sensei, Naruto called out, looking directly at him despite him being hidden. But you can't prank the prank master. Stepping out from behind the tree and the genjutsu, Kakashi looked quizzically at him. He had seriously underestimated this dobe, this boy. That didn't happen often to him. But just because of his own error, he couldn't simply pass the blonde. Not when that was not the point of the exercise. Very true, Naruto, Kakashi said. I'll remember that next time. I'll keep this, Kakashi-sensei. The blonde closed his eyes as his foxy grin grew very large. He held up the bell victoriously. But it was this instant that was all the former ANBU needed. Keep what? The Jounin asked, curiously. The bell, the blonde said as he looked at where it used to be. Huh! The bell. What? You mean this bell? Kakashi asked as he held up the item with same victorious gesture that Naruto had used. The blonde stared up at it, quite surprised. But that surprise was slaughtered as anger boiled over. "That's not fair, sensei!" he screamed. "I got that bell fair and square. Now give it back!" "No, Naruto," Kakashi said with a finality in his voice. "You have to take the bell from me. Not pick it up off the ground after a failed trap." "Fine," Naruto yelled as he rushed forward. "Then I'll take it from you again." With one punch, the blonde was sent flying across the field. He hit a tree and slumped to ground, apparently unconscious. Well, that was certainly a unique experience, he thought as he replaced the bell with the other and made to pull out his book. However, the sound of kunai whizzing through the air attracted his attention. It could only be the Uchiha. Sighing in annoyance, he did the kawarimi again. As he caught sight of where the weapons had come from, the Jounin couldn't help but wonder. Do the rest of this genin team would have as unique and surprising abilities as Naruto? It wasn't the splitting headache that awoke him. No, it was the loud growling of his stomach. Stirring, Naruto cradled both his head and stomach as he sat up. Glancing around, he saw that he was in a wooded area, probably a training field. What was he doing here again? Brushing his hand against his headband, Naruto remembered in an instant. Standing up, he looked around for the Jounin, but the man was nowhere to be seen. "Sensei, I swear you're going to regret that. When this is over, I'll kick your ass across the Hokage monument." As much as he wanted to entertain that comforting thought, his more rational side shook it off. Sighing, he sat down cross-legged and tried to think. Closing his eyes, he replayed his fight with the man in his mind. He spotted one serious mistake on his part instantly. It was so basic he couldn't believe he let it happen. He let Sensei get him mad. While he had no animosity toward the man, there was something about his attitude that just rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was that subtle "I'm better than you are" attitude which reminded him of Sasuke, or how he automatically looked down on him despite his infamous reputation at being a master prankster. Whatever the reason, Kakashi-sensei was able to stir up his foul temper quite easily. Then he realized something that he hadn't before. The Jounin instructor had immediately labeled him as weak because he couldn't see through or maybe didn't even notice Naruto's facade. This thought before a devious chuckle from him. But it died soon enough as he realized that he'd slipped with facade. By him showing just about how good he was with using his head in different jutsu combinations, the Jounin must be slightly suspicious of him now. And because of his anger, Naruto had attacked in a blind rage. Not even realizing that he'd lost a vital advantage early on when using his Oboro no Jutsu. By yelled out loud, it made it easier for the Baka-sensei to determine his location. That was probably the reason the man had been able to dodge that punch so perfectly. The jutsu that Kakashi used on him struck him as about as embarrassing and useless as Iruka often called his Oiroku no Jutsu. He'd have to think about that one later to see if he could maybe utilize its basic concept. It was only when he was launched into the river that his anger got smoldered enough for him to think rationally. The rest of the fight went more or less how he'd have expected it to go, except that he was a bit slower thanks to the weight of the water that drenched his clothing. Despite the fact that he'd hoped to snatch a bell after he'd landed another hit on Kakashi, he wasn't too surprised when the man broke free just as he was reaching for them. Now if Naruto had been dry, there was probably a good chance he'd be holding the bells right now. Now Kakashi using one of his own clones as a replacement was just pure genius. A foxy grin broke across his face as he imagined how useful this idea could be in the future. From now on, whenever he used Kagebushin, he'd be ready to mimic that replacement if need be. But how do I get a bell? He wondered. Kakashi was obviously stronger, faster, and more experienced than I am. I bet those early blows I got in on him were just because he underestimated me. He won't make that mistake again. I'm sure. I guess I could set up some traps, but even if I used Kagebushins, I'm sure he'd still evade them. Just puzzling over this riddle was making his already aching head spin in pain. Damn, why did that one-eyed team have to hit him so hard? I wonder how Sakura-chan and Sasuke team are doing, he absent-mindedly wondered. Then an idea hit him. If I could get Sakura-chan and the team to help me, I might be able to get a bell. Sasuke's very good at taijutsu and Sakura is at genjutsu. Maybe I could swarm Kakashi with clones, then use Enmaku no Jutsu so he won't be able to see. While we keep him busy, Sakura could hide under a genjutsu and steal the bells. Yeah, that should work. Stretching out his senses, he felt the other members of his team close by. He got up and sprinted for them. The scene that greeted him wasn't what he expected. But it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Just how did Sasuke get to be only a head above ground? He tried to hold it in. In all true and pure honesty, he did try to hold it. But in the end, he couldn't. Naruto exploded with uncontrollable laughter. Sakura, having just spotted him, was having a hysterical fit and was yelling something about her crush only being ahead and talking. Having just recovered from a very traumatizing genjutsu, she wasn't ready to encounter something like this so soon. She had been only seconds away from fainting when she heard one of the many things she hated most in the world. Naruto was laughing. Instantly forgetting her melodrama, she turned in the general direction of the sound and spotted him up on a tree branch nearby. He was holding his sides, eyes closed with tears of pure mirth falling out. Because he wasn't focused on his balance, he slipped and fell. If he even felt any pain upon landing, he didn't notice as he continued. "That's the funniest thing I've ever seen," he yelled out to the world. "Sasuke's totally soiled. Ha ha." Sasuke tried valiantly not to ignore the blonde idiot as he wriggled and tried to free himself. Painstakingly slowly, he could feel himself coming loose. He made a mental note to beat the blonde to pulp later. "Shut up, Naruto!" Sakura yelled instantly. "It's not Sasuke's fault. Kakashi-sensei did it to him." But the blonde, for once, completely ignored the pink-haired Kunoichi. He lay on his back, kicking the ground as he futilely tried to vent his pent-up amusement, while trying to burn the image into his memories permanently. Then the sound of an alarm going off attracted all their attentions. Then realization descended upon them. Not a single one of them got a bell. "Oh, Sakura?" A familiar voice called sweetly from the tree cover. Looking up, the genin spotted their jounin instructor leaning on a tree trunk. He had what could only be considered as evil gleam in his eye as he gazed at the girl. "Hi, sensei?" she answered, suddenly realizing that she was in trouble. "Did you try to get a bell?" he asked nonchalantly. Sakura stared at him. She was indeed in very big trouble. "And no, sensei." "You know what that means." "Not the post, sensei." His only reply was what they'd come to call his smiling eye. Seeing that simple gesture, Sakura let out a terrified shriek as she turned and tried to run as far and as fast as she could away from him. All she managed to do was run into him as he suddenly appeared in front of her. Kakashi had been more than a little disappointed and saddened as he explained the concept of the survival exercise to the genin from his rather comfortable perch on Sasuke's back. He'd been so sure that they'd be the team he'd pass, especially with Naruto's and Sasuke's surprising levels of skill. If they tried to work together to get the bells, he felt sure that they'd have gotten at least one bell. Whenever Kakashi had a team that he was supposed to pass and instruct, he used this training field. This was because it had the perfect example as to what happens when a team doesn't use teamwork. The memorial stone was as saddening today as it had always been. Of course, because of how he'd worded the description of the heroes on the stone, Naruto misunderstood the meaning. What he said put a small chill down Kakashi's spine. The blonde wanted his name on the stone that held the names of killed in action shinobi. And he said that Kakashi would be the one to carve the name into it, to show that he respected his heroism. Though he didn't say it, Kakashi was grateful to Sakura for clarifying what he'd said to Naruto. Naruto, who had truly misunderstood his sensei, found his large grin slipping off his face as he lowered his head in shame. The atmosphere around them took a noticeably quieter and sadder feeling to it, out of respect for the fallen shinobi heroes. Sighing, Kakashi turned back to the genin. They all looked solemn as they gazed upon the stone. Sasuke had quickly returned to their sides. Naruto dropped to the ground in an undignified collapse. Sasuke just kneeled down near Sakura, who was tied to the center post. Perhaps they still had a chance. "All right," he had said, drawing their attentions. "I'm going to give you one last chance. But it's going to be much harder this time." Leaving strict instructions to not feed Sakura for her failure and not even attempting to get a bell, Kakashi had vanished in a poof of smoke. After his brief fight with Naruto, Kakashi had come to a startling conclusion. The boy's sensory skills were very adept to say the least. But because he wasn't sure of the range of the blonde's senses, he needed to tread carefully. So he took the precaution to hide downwind, under a very powerful genjutsu, and suppressing his chakra down to very low levels. He now watched as the pair ate quietly, trying to ignore the surprisingly loud complaints from Sakura's stomach. She must not have had dinner last night, he realized. He sighed quietly. He still couldn't understand females and their obsession with dieting, especially Kunoichi. Naruto nonchalantly was gazing around the clearing, no doubt searching for him. Even from this distance, Kakashi could see the blonde's nose twitch slightly. So I was right, he does have incredible sensory abilities. Then, almost simultaneously, Sasuke and Naruto held out their bento boxes toward Sakura. All three genin stared at each other in surprise, especially the boys. Before either boy could speak, Sakura said, "I won't eat, even if you force it down my throat." "Well, that's too bad, Sakura-chan," Naruto said with a devious grin. "Because I don't like these vegetables, but I'm not letting them go to waste or you go hungry." Besides, Sasuke added moodily, We'll need your help to get the bells, and if you're hungry, you'll be weak and hold us back. Sakura looked truly torn before she submitted. Truth be told, she probably would have cried out in pure ecstasy that her crush was offering her food. But when Naruto jumped in to give her one of his gross vegetables, she almost spit it out into his face. She had wanted Sasuke to feed her, but her stomach let out another complaint, so she reluctantly swallowed. Kakashi smiled at this. Finally! All right, Naruto yelled, pumping his fist in the air. We did it! We passed! Shut up, Naruto, Sakura growled. Though she was happy to have passed, her being tied to the post and unable to use no jutsu to escape the rope, made a fool of because she didn't even try to get a bell, completely outdone by her other teammates' performances, and having to be fed by Naruto had put her into a rather bad mood. She glared at the oblivious boy as he hopped along ahead them as they walked back to Konoha. Though he was clearly still the idiot that she'd known for most of her life, she couldn't help but grudgingly respect him. He'd shown quite an uncharacteristic amount of inventiveness, strategizing, when he'd gotten serious, and skill with those weird jutsus he'd used. This thought immediately piqued her interest. Naruto! She called out. As the blonde turned to her, she put on what she hoped would be an innocent smile. The baka had a crush on her, right? Maybe she could use that to squeeze the information out of him. What? He asked. She almost didn't notice it, but his eyes got a suspicious gleam as he saw her smile. Where did you learn those jutsus you used on Kakashi-sensei? She asked with as much sweetness as she could muster. You better talk, Dobe, or I'll pulverize you, her inner Sakura screamed, waving a threatening fist at him. Huh? He said, looking at her confused. Oh? You mean Kagebushin? Well, I'd like to tell you, but Ajisen said I couldn't. Gomen. Why would someone forbid you from telling us? Sasuke asked, glancing at the blonde. Naruto just smirked. He knew something that Sasuke didn't, so he instantly chose to add a little salt to wound by saying, that is a secret, Sasuke team. What about those two other ones? Sakura pressed. She really wanted to know about Kagebushin in particular, but the blonde seemed dead set against telling anyone for once. Well, she might as well try to information on the others. Others? Naruto asked, playing dumb. Inside, he already was trying to formulate a plan to distract them or make them not inquire on his secrets. After all, Enmiku and Oboro were his. What others? Naruto, Sakura said, using that tone of voice that always warned him of imminent danger. What were they? Jutsus, duh, he said, throwing out an arrogant foxy grin. 2 sharp blows to the head later found him on the ground, dazed. Sasuke and Sakura looked at each other in surprise. Sasuke quickly looked away as he crossed his arms. Sakura felt as if destiny had finally stepped in to help her. She and her crush had had the same impulse and acted at the same time. They were meant to be. Then again, maybe irony had a hand in it too, for that moment's distraction was all that the blonde needed to promptly disappear, using all his stealth. As he glanced back towards the rapidly disappearing backs of his teammates, the expression on his face changed. As much as he wanted to boast to his heart's content, he put his sweat and blood into those jutsus. He wasn't about to tell them that they were his own creations when it was guaranteed that they wouldn't believe him anyway. His teammates went from being slightly surprised, embarrassed, and in Sakura's case, starstruck, to furious. The blonde enigma escaped. Old man! A familiar voice yelled as soon as he arrived. Large miso special ramen for Konoha's newest and best genin. Ichiraka didn't even need to look up from his work to know who that was, but he did anyway. Naruto had mud on his pants legs, his clothes still damp from his swim in the river, and the back of his jacket was scoffed up like he'd crawled out of a pile of thorns. But that ever-present grin was as wide and happy as ever. I passed that stupid test Baka-sensei had us do, he declared proudly. Ayam looked over at him and smiled sweetly. That was all that was needed for him to launch into a blow-by-blow story of how he thrashed his sensei. When he reached the end of his story, Ayam smiled again at him and said, "It sounds like your sensei didn't know what he was in for, did he?" "Of course not," Naruto said happily. "Because he didn't practice what he preached. See through deception. He doesn't seem like a very good teacher to me, not like Irika-sensei." A week full of D-rank missions for a fresh genin team was pure hell. That was the simple and honest truth. There was only so much ambitious genins, like Naruto and Sasuke, could take. Especially when their constant missions were little more than chores, babysitting, shopping, gardening, repainting homes, fixing broken-down buildings, cleaning Konoha in general every day when they weren't training. Upon hearing that their first mission was nothing more than having to weed a lazy gardener's flower bed, Naruto had laughed it off like it was a joke. But as it became clear throughout the week that they weren't going to be given any mission that was even remotely interesting, the blonde's temper was beginning to swell. Naruto now was walking to Ichiraku's after his most recent mission. This chore was merely transporting a recipe scroll to a restaurant across town. The blonde, at this point, was ready to tear the said recipe to pieces and demand another mission. The fact that Sasuke now held on to it, and was giving him a warning glare was the only thing that stopped his baser instincts. He kept his clenched fists in his pockets, resolutely trying not to vent his temper on the glares his was receiving for just walking down the street. Then a familiar scent crept up into his nose. It was relatively new to him, but he'd recognize it anywhere. Glancing nonchalantly around, he spotted a tarp near a brick wall of a building. It was pathetically obvious that someone was hiding behind it, especially when the brat's dark hair was protruding above the top edge. Turning to face the kid, Naruto called out, "Don't try to pretend that I can't see, Konohamaru. It's so obvious, it's pathetic." A chuckle erupted from behind the tarp as Konohamaru lowered it, accepting his defeat. He had felt it was time to remind his blonde rival that he couldn't let his guard when Konohamaru was destined to replace his grandfather. Besides, with his new and improved training regime, he was bound to surpass the blonde soon enough. "You sure haven't slacked off lately, boss," he said, tucking the tarp away. He then slid into a basic taijutsu stance as he continued, "Now, fight me fair and square." "Huh?" Naruto asked, cocking his head to side. "Again? No way, Konohamaru, I've just got done with a mission and I'm hungry. Maybe later." But Konohamaru started, a feeling of depression settling in. He wanted to fight the blonde now, while he'd lost Ero-sensei. "Honorable grandson," an all too familiar voice said behind him. "You heard what that boy said. He's weak and he isn't worth your time to fight anyway." "Shut up, Ero-sensei," Konohamaru barked as he turned to face the man. "What did you call me?" Naruto yelled, forgetting his growling stomach. It had been a long, aggravating day and this was probably the worst time for him to be insulted. Thus his anger finally got the better of him. "Weak," Ebisu said simply. While it was debatable on how weak the blonde really was, the fact of the matter was that he didn't have the experience that Ebisu had, right? "Other than a large amount of chakra and a long list of pranks," Ebisu said, talking to Konohamaru and pointedly ignoring the blonde. "This boy has no other traits that are worthy of recognition. You'd do well to stop hanging around this dope, honorable grandson." "Oh yeah!" Two voices yelled out together. Naruto continued as Konohamaru glanced at him in surprise. "I'm gonna be Hokage one day, and you're going to respect me." "I know about your dream, Naruto," Ebisu said, with a hint of annoyance at being reminded of that dream again. It was quite irritating to hear Konohamaru always talk about that goal. But where he was willing to help the Sandame's grandson, he was annoyed that this boy would have the same goal. "But you have neither experience, nor the virtues of a Hokage," Ebisu continued. "Plus I am well aware of the fact that you even have exceptionally poor chakra control. Such control is vital to a Hokage. How do you plan on becoming something that is clearly beyond your reach?" Naruto was ready to either beat the jounin to mush or subject the pervert to his patented harem no jutsu. Then something clicked in his mind. The man was a jounin renowned for his teaching skills. He might be able to help him. Thrusting his finger forward, Naruto pointed straight at the man. Then, in a voice that reflected his determination, he declared, "Then teach me how to." A silence descended upon the trio. Konohamaru was glancing back and forth between his sensei and rival. Where had this come from? Ebisu was staring at the blonde kid in surprise. The brat didn't just request him to teach him, he demanded that Ebisu teach him. "Ah, boss?" Konohamaru said quietly with a confused expression. "What are you doing?" Snorting, the man said, "Why should I instruct a brat like you? What would I have to gain from it?" "All right, a bet," Naruto snapped, while grinning on the inside. "You teach me advanced chakra control. If I don't get it within 3 days, I promise I'll abandon my dream to become Hokage. If I do get it, you have to teach me a jutsu." "Relinquish your dream of being Hokage, huh?" Ebisu said, turning the bet over in his mind. At best, he could stop hearing Konohamaru talking about the demon vessel like he was an honorable opponent, and the brat would realize that he wasn't meant to become such a powerful shinobi. At worst, he'd just have to teach the brat a simple jutsu. "Very well," Ebisu said, adjusting his sunglasses. "I accept." The next day, after another pointless mission, Naruto was in hot springs where Ero-sensei had told him to be. As to why the pervert wanted him here was slightly beyond his understanding. Hearing some talking inside the hot springs, Naruto yielded to his curiosity. It took little time for him to find a knothole to peer through. On the other side of the hole was something he truly hadn't meant to see. The room was filled with hot, sweaty, and softly talking women, naked women. He covered his mouth in an attempt to keep from yelling out in surprise and embarrassment from such a sight. Naruto jerked himself away from the hole with a glowing brilliant red face, only to come face to face with Ebisu. "What are you doing, Naruto?" Ebisu demanded hotly. "I won't allow you to indulge into your hobbies while you're supposed to be training." "Shut up," Naruto yelled, still red-faced. "I don't do stuff like that. Besides, you're the pervert." "Why'd we come to this place anyway?" Naruto continued, cutting off Ebisu's denial. "Are we gonna take a bath before we start training?" "No," Ebisu said with a crooked smile as he readjusted his sunglasses. "We will be training here at the hot springs." Naruto shot him a confused look as he tried to understand what the man was talking about. What were they going to do here that involved chakra control? It just didn't make sense to him. "Now," Ebisu said as he walked over to the steamy water's edge. "You wanted advanced chakra control? Well, here's an example of what all jounins are capable of." He chuckled as with a knowing smirk, he said simply, "Walk atop water." Huh! Naruto sure wasn't expecting that. He had thought it was some sort of water-controlling exercise. But walking on water was very advanced compared to his current status as a fresh genin. Immediately launching into his lecture mode, Ebisu said, "In order to float on water, you must always expel the appropriate amount of chakra into the water from your feet. You must make it match only to the amount necessary to make you float. This chakra control is much more difficult than to simply continue to create the same amount of chakra and is meant to be used for controlled training where you learn to create a set amount of chakra needed to expel for the use of a jutsu." Naruto said thoughtfully. He'd understood everything that the pervert was saying, but to live up to his reputation of being a baka, a small comment of, "I don't get it," was needed. Sighing resignedly at the blonde's act, Ebisu said, "Well, in your case, it's probably better to show you how to do it. First," he said as his feet began to glow a faint blue. "You gather the chakra to your feet." Taking a step forward, he walked out on top of the water as though it were as solid as rock. Then as you continually expel a set amount of chakra, you match it to the weight of your body. "Wow!" was the blonde's response as he immediately saw dozens of possibilities for jutsu combos with this ability. Bringing his hands together, he immediately began to gather chakra to his feet. As he spoke aloud the steps to the exercise, he performed them. As he stepped onto the surface of the water, his feet quickly began to sink into the scorching water. His descent was only partially halted by his chakra, making him very slightly buoyant. The man said as he watched the blonde quickly sinking and screaming out in pain at the burning water. "Not quite what I expected. I guess I forgot to tell you, but this bath water is 70 degrees. If you continue to fail, you'll become a boiled egg faster than a Hokage." Climbing back ashore when he reached his waistline, Naruto glared at the water like it was insulting him. Bringing his hands together again, he refocused his chakra on the exercise. Stepping onto the water, he fell through as though he'd not even been using the chakra. Ebisu watched as the blonde continued to experiment. In his mind replayed a recent and surprising conversation he'd had with Konohamaru a little earlier. The boy, who wouldn't believe a single word he'd said prior to meeting Naruto, was now pushing himself to his limits in training. At first Ebisu had thought that the kid had finally realized that his method of training was the easy way to become Hokage. Upon sharing this information, Konohamaru simply said that there isn't an easy way. Naruto had told him so. Now, as he watched the blonde struggling to remain afloat, but constantly sinking, he began to see the evil demon child in a new light. They stayed at the hot springs for hours, only stopping when Naruto's stomach let out a rather loud complaint. Ebisu dismissed the blonde for the evening. But while he seriously desired to read his latest Ika Paradise volume in the safety of his home, he decided to return to the hot springs. It was just a hunch, but it turned out to be correct. Naruto came back to the hot springs to continue the training. After that first day, Naruto continued his water walking exercise after Team 7's missions or training. The second day turned out to be the most exhausting for him since, after a short mission of babysitting some daimyos for children, Naruto was taking the bed very seriously, so he spent as much time as he could in the hot springs. On the third day, it seemed that Kakashi had gotten slightly curious as to why Naruto was coming to missions with damp clothes for the past couple of days. While Kakashi didn't seem to care what the blonde was doing, it still piqued his interest. Was he merely just taking a swim in his clothes? Did he just suddenly decide that he liked wet clothes? So when he followed the boy into the hot springs afterwards, it kind of surprised him. He was practicing an advanced level of chakra control that just shouldn't be possible for a boy at his age or experience. The boy, after falling and after a desperate attempt to remain afloat, seemed to notice his presence. Sitting up, the blonde turned his back on the man as he glared at the water. What am I doing wrong, Kakashi-sensei? He asked, not bothering to face him. Stepping out from his hiding place, Kakashi considered the question. It seemed that his chakra control was better than he'd originally thought, but it didn't seem as though he'd gotten the basic concept of how to do this exercise. Then again. Perhaps you are just too heavy, he said, peering over the edge of his book. Naruto looked up in surprise. Then just as Kakashi was about to point it out, Naruto turned and started to strip down to his boxers. Throwing his soaked and heavy clothes to the side, he began to gather chakra again. Stepping tentatively onto the water's surface, he floated there for a moment. An excited shout of awe and happiness burst from him, but in that instant he faltered on his control and promptly fell into the water again. A few more tries and splashes later, a panting and steaming blonde lay on the cool stones of the hot springs floor. In his mind played the new information he'd gotten. His clothes had indeed been weighing him down, meaning that the chakra he'd been expelling hadn't been enough after he'd fallen in. Then after he'd stripped, his control had been noticeably improved, but he still couldn't focus on the exercise long enough to not fall in. You know, a bored voice said from the doorway. If you tried to concentrate a little more, you wouldn't fall in as much. I know that, Baka-sensei, Naruto yelled, irritated at the man for voicing his own thoughts. But this takes a lot of focusing. For someone with your skill level, perhaps, Kakashi said as he turned a page. By the way, Naruto, why are you doing this training right now anyway? This is advanced chakra control. You haven't yet practiced tree climbing yet, have you? He lifted his eye to gaze at the blonde after that question. Naruto glanced at him for a moment with a confused look etched into his face. How can climbing trees be helped with chakra control? He asked. Mentally he filed that scrap of information away for later examination. I suppose you haven't then, Kakashi said simply as he returned to reading. Oh well, to each his own. Kakashi-san, a familiar voice said from behind him. What are you doing here? I was investigating my students' recent activities, he said, not bothering to look up from his book. I take it you have something to do this training that Naruto's doing? Hi, Ebisu said, walking into the room. He shot a distasteful glare at the one-eyed jounin for reading such books in front of children. Then, when the glare was ignored, he continued, the brat made a bet with me. I have to teach him a jutsu if he's able to do this exercise after 3 days. If not, he gives up on being Hokage. Glancing up in surprise at that, Kakashi looked between the two for a moment before returning to his reading. Now that he knew what was going on, he quickly excused himself. Whatever the blonde did wasn't truly any of his business, as long as he got to missions and training on time. Now let's see how far you've progressed, Ebisu said, watching the blonde with a scrutinizing glare. You must be able to float on the surface for more than a minute before you lose control. Glaring at the man, Naruto turned back to water. This was going to be difficult. He could at best float on the water for more than 20 seconds before he sunk. What he needed now was either an excessive amount of chakra at his disposal, or truly good control over what he had left in his slightly depleted reserves. Too bad he didn't really have either. Come on, Naruto, he yelled to himself. Get it together. You can do this. Believe it. In ritual form, he brought his hands up and began concentrating on his chakra. He could feel it swirling around and through his feet. Then taking a tentative step out onto the water, he adjusted the amount accordingly. As then he took another step and another. Surprisingly, he'd found it much easier to concentrate when he was moving. Closing his eyes, he concentrated solely on the feel of his chakra running through his feet. Nothing else entered his mind and any sounds he heard fell on deaf ears. He would concentrate only on this control because he was going to be Hokage someday. He wasn't about to give up on that dream just because of a little bet with a perverted old man. He didn't know how long he was walking on the water, but as he continued, he found it getting easier. Then his focus begin to loosen as a new habit formed. When he opened his eyes, he saw himself on the opposite side of the pool he'd started at. Turning around, he repeated the process. Ebisu was staring with surprise and awe. This boy had just walked across the hot springs with scarcely a ripple. Not only that, he didn't seem to show any signs of chakra depletion or faltering control. It would seem that when push comes to shove, he thought with a new respect for the boy. He can improve in leaps and bounds. Okay, that's enough, Ebisu called out. You've made it quite clear that you've mastered it. Naruto looked up in surprise for a moment. Had he lost track of time? Then a foxy grin erupted across his face. He'd gotten the exercise. That meant he was going to learn a new jutsu. With an excited cry of victory, Naruto jumped high into the air. Ebisu felt a smile forming on his face at the blonde's eagerness. Maybe this boy wasn't as much of a screw-up as he'd originally thought. When Naruto came down from his jump, he tried to land on the surface. But his focus was completely shot at the thought of learning a new jutsu that he promptly fell into the scorching the water yet again. With a smirk and a readjustment of his sunglasses, Ebisu decided to teach the blonde one of his better jutsus. The jutsu was called Futon, Kaze Tate, the wind shield. A simple, Chunin-level jutsu used to create a small tornado of wind around the user, usually strong enough to deflect the common kunai and shuriken. While excited to be taught a potentially useful jutsu, Naruto complained quite loudly about only being taught a defensive Chunin jutsu. Ebisu's answer was simple. The Kaze Tate is only as strong as the amount of chakra used to create it, Uzumaki-san. So, if you were to feed enough chakra into it, you could be generating a powerful defense as long as it is sustained. To prove his point, Ebisu performed the Kaze Tate no jutsu with Naruto hurling several Fuma shuriken that the Jounin had brought along. With the extra boost of chakra that Ebisu was feeding the jutsu, all the Fuma shuriken were safely deflected well before they came anywhere near him. Forgetting his complaints, Naruto set to mastering the jutsu as soon as he possibly could. It only required 3 hand seals. But he seemed to have trouble with hand seals. It took him too long to do them, which could slow the releasing of a jutsu in a fight. So now he sat in his apartment, wide awake despite the late hour, practicing his hand seals. Flashing through them yet again, he noted that with the increased speed it was harder to mold chakra. And if he tried to go too fast, his fingers would tangle. But the thought that his slow seals could give his enemies, namely Sasuke, an advantage in a fight fueled his desire to speed up the process. Plus, he remembered, speed was also crucial in a battle as proven to him by his fight with Baka-sensei. A loud growling sounded from his stomach as he readied to unleash another set of hand seals. Had he lost track of time again? A glance at his battered alarm clock brought a resigned sigh from him. 2:30? Yes, he did lose track of time. About 15 instant ramen cups later found the blonde dozing where he sat at the table. It had been a long time since he tried to work on his latest secret jutsu. Even months after the Hyuga prank, he still couldn't break those balloons and it was starting to irritate him. What was he doing wrong? No matter how fast he spun the chakra and water inside the balloon, it just refused to burst. He could spin it so fast that the balloon would flatten and stretch to such extremes that it amazed him that it didn't break. What was wrong with his idea? If the chakra was spinning so fast, and no doubt that it was more than enough force to break the balloon, why wasn't it? In his befuddled mind, he brought his hands up into a familiar cross seal. Forming a clone on the other side of the table, he grinned sleepily at it. I'm stumped, he said simply. Why can't I break the balloon with my chakra? How should I know? The clone demanded. You're the genius who thought up this crazy idea, why doesn't it? Heh, he snorted indignantly. You are me too. So tell me, genius, why won't it work? Not a clue, was the answer. Have some more ramen. It helped last time. Naruto glanced lazily at the most recent cup, still filled partially with the delicious juices he loved so much. He shoved it roughly at the clone as he grunted, It's all gone, Baka. This is the last cup. Well then drink it, you blonde Baka. It barked, shoving it back at him with a bit more force than it probably intended. The juice was shaken up enough to get tossed out over the edge and splatter into Naruto's face. The clone smirked at its creator's surprised face. If you just have drunk it in the first place, that wouldn't have happened. But Naruto didn't reply. He was staring at the churning water in the cup. The clone noticed his lapse of attention quickly, and it stared at him. What? What are you staring at? That's it, Naruto said, glancing up at the clone with a growing smile. Getting up, he rushed over to cabinet that held the stash of water balloons. He filled it accordingly and then returned to the table. The clone could only watch in confusion as the original began focusing chakra into the balloon. But this time it was different. Where it would flatten before, it didn't now. Large bulges began pushes themselves out of the balloon in all directions. Grunting in his concentration, greatly improved after water walking, he forced the chakra to spin at incredible speeds. Then it burst. As the water erupted from the balloon, the last strands of blue chakra faded. Panting from the exertion he just endured from having to focus so much of his chakra to do that, he glanced up to his clone. The clone wore a surprised stare on its face. But that stare quickly changed to a cocky, foxy grin as he began to understand what Naruto had just done. To spin the water in one direction was good for practice, but he just spun it in 4, 5, even 6 directions at once. That was more than the balloon could handle. Finally, he was one step closer to completing this jutsu. Sasuke, I'm at point B, the Uchiha whispered over the radio. Sakura, I'm at point C, she whispered soon after. About 30 seconds later, Naruto whispered, "Naruto, I'm at point A." "You're slow, Naruto," Kakashi said disapprovingly. There was a rustle of branches and leaves. It was their target, and it was moving. They rushed after it, using all the foliage and brush to their advantage. With them being downwind, they were able to sneak up it to fairly easily. "What's your distance from the target?" Kakashi asked when they didn't respond after a few moments. 5 meters, Naruto mumbled from behind a tree. "I'm ready, just give me the signal." "I'm ready too," Sasuke said, glancing around from his own tree trunk. "So am I," Sakura confirmed. This was one of their more exciting missions. They were deep in the forest, tracking quite the easy trail that their prey had left behind. Kakashi stood near the forest tree line waiting for them to return while issuing instructions. "Now!" Kakashi ordered. As one, the 3 shinobi lunged from their hiding places. But Naruto, for once faster than even Sasuke, was able to tackle their prey to ground. That proved to be a mistake, as the badly frightened cat let out a terrified whine and immediately turned its wrath on the one responsible. As they watched the blonde literally get his face clawed off by the frightened feline, Kakashi asked, "Can you verify a ribbon on its right ear?" A simple glance and flash of red later, Sasuke said, "Affirmative, we have a positive ID." Sighing, Kakashi said, "Roger. Lost pet, Tora captured, mission accomplished." Scarcely a second later, Naruto voiced his opinion on the mission. Thanks to a nervous wreck that was now the feline in his face, his bad mood escalated dangerously. With the need for stealth now void, he yelled into the microphone, nearly breaking Kakashi's eardrums in the process. "Couldn't we have gotten a better mission than this? I hate cats." They had traveled in less than 2 days what a normal person would travel in little more than a week. Though they weren't quite used to it, racing through the thick forest and foliage that was what gave the Fire Country's hidden village its distinctive namesake, the pair didn't pause for even a moment. There was only one objective in their minds: mission. They had observed their prey and his bodyguards since they'd left the protection of their hidden village. It was a little surprising to see that their prey had only hired out a single genin team to escort him, and not at least Chunin's. Then again, the genin sensei was the infamous Hatake Kakashi, also known as Copycat Kakashi. It was very nerve-wracking for the pair. They wanted to pounce, to kill, to maim, especially Kakashi. His head would fetch a very high price in Kirigakure. And if they struck him fast and mercilessly, there was no way he'd survive. After all, they were called the Demon Brothers for nothing. But they couldn't do that while the group was still within easy traveling distance of Konoha. So they followed, watching from the safety of the foliage. And it certainly wasn't a boring show that the genins were putting on. The blonde loudmouth seemed to be determined to get the pink-haired girl's attention, while her focus was on the dark-haired boy. When he couldn't get her, the blonde baka would turn a surprising amount of wrath on the other boy, as though he were doing it on purpose. Then the girl would retaliate for her crush if he didn't. The blonde would either get abused by the boy's quick wit, or he'd get a smack to the ground by the girl. Even their prey took some time to insult the baka, who always had to be restrained by Kakashi from assaulting him. They would enjoy getting rid of the brats, especially the blonde loudmouth, as he would undoubtedly scream the loudest. Kakashi was silent the whole time, except for the time he told them about the basics of the shinobi villages and relations, or for them to set up camp for the night. When they had gotten close to the Fire Country border, the pair's patience had finally waned. They set up a trap right in plain sight, disguised as a puddle. In their impatience, they failed to take into account the dry weather. At first it seemed as though the group hadn't even noticed their presence. Then, just as he passing the puddle, the blonde's nose twitched. A look of disgust crossed his face as he quickly covered it as he cast a forlorn look around for the source of the stench. But nonetheless, he continued on his path. The brothers were too busy contemplating the boy's behavior to notice that Kakashi had spotted them. The quick attack went smoothly. They easily wrapped up the copynin and tore him to shreds with their chain link. Then, as they were about to pounce the blonde kid, things took a turn for the worse. The dark kid pinned their chain link to a tree as the blonde seemed to react on instinct. He leapt back and slammed his elbows into their stomachs. In their surprise and pain, they didn't notice the other boy landing on their gauntlets until he kicked them in the face. The chain broke and they wasted little time separating. One had rushed their prey, with the dark boy sprinting in front of and using his body as a shield. The other leapt backward, then rushed forward to finish the blonde. Then Kakashi intervened. It took a rather smart kick to both their heads from the girl before they were roused. Humiliatingly enough, they were tied tightly to the tree and entirely disarmed of their various weapons. The brothers struggled to escape their binds, but, as Sakura discovered, Kakashi was very good at tying up all loose ends. Kakashi hadn't questioned them. He didn't have to because their prey was more than willing to tell him everything he needed to know. And because of some low tactics, he was still able to guarantee their continued protection despite his deception. Now as the new Knin were being collected by the hunter Nin, they couldn't help but to curse the impudent whelps and the days they were born. As he had promised, the demon of the mist now watched the group of the Konoha shinobi. It had come as a surprise to realize that his underlings had been defeated. So, when that parasite Gatu appeared to vent his wrath, Zabuza was quite looking forward to this battle. Hataki Kakashi, eh? He thought with a delighted sneer. This is gonna be fun. He couldn't help but chuckle sinisterly as he imagined the fun of crushing the copy Nin and cashing that very high bounty on the man's head. But it was that chuckle, no matter how subdued, that attracted the Jounin's attention. And someone else, surprisingly. The blonde shrimp in that ridiculously bright orange jumpsuit immediately whirled around and threw a kunai straight at him. Though taken slightly off guard, Zabuza used the kawarimi to escape. Crouched high up in a tree and expertly hidden, he continued watching as the group reacted to the blonde's sudden actions. The girl was fast to berate him, which he quickly tried to pacify her by claiming he'd heard something. But she apparently didn't believe him, and her belief was only reinforced when she saw the terrified hair that he'd substituted himself with. Kakashi had easily realized that it was a kawarimi, he knew. The man was standing there casually watching the pair of kids, or to a normal person he was. To Zabuza's trained eye, he watched as the man scanned the surrounding area, no doubt searching for an alien chakra signature. Zabuza couldn't tell if his sensory skills were advanced enough to detect him, but he didn't feel like taking the chance. Besides, who was Zabuza to keep people waiting when they seemed to want to rush to death? He didn't exactly everything that was going on around him. But what he did know was certain was that the muscle-bound killer on the slab of steel that could also be called a sword was intent on killing him. The fact that the kids were surrounding him with kunai at the ready and their sensei was keeping a close eye on the man didn't ease the growing fear in his stomach. If the situation hadn't been quite as life-threatening to him, he would have been fascinated by the speeds and skills that the shinobi showed. The most awesome were the Mist Shinobi, Momochi Zabuza he'd been called, and the Genin Sensei. They were able to produce copies of themselves out of water, move at incredible speeds, and even stand on water. Yet the situation took a grim turn to disaster when Kakashi got caught. Even though the Jounin was ordering them to run away, which was technically good advice, his students were still reluctantly to leave him to his fate. Tazuna had to privately applaud their commitment to rescue their sensei, even though they were clearly scared as much as he was. This demon of a man completely thrashed the two boys, with little effort it seemed. But as watched the blonde kid, who he'd instantly labeled as a loser and undoubtedly weak, rushing the water clone to get his headband back, he felt a new respect for the baka. His following declaration that he wasn't going to back down, even in the face of certain death, actually was able to lift Tazuna's fear, if only temporarily. What came next from the blonde kid and the moody dark kid greatly surprised him. They worked together which, given the last few days of constant bickering and beating, amazed him. Naruto surrounded the Mizu Bunshin with Kage Bunshins instantly. They quickly formed the Tora seal and inhaled deeply. When the smoke cloud engulfed the clone and blocked off the Zabuza's point of view, one of the Kage Bunshins suddenly transformed into a Fuma Shuriken and was thrown to the moody boy. Sasuke, catching a meaningful glance from Naruto, was quickly able to catch on to the boy's plan. He took a sprinting run through the smoke, ignoring the sounds of fighting that were coming from the Bunshins. In the smoke cloud, the Mizu Bunshin was having a tough time fighting all the Kage Bunshins. Though he was an expert in killing in the mist, he had very rarely ever come across another who could see him without their eyes. The shadows were easy enough to destroy, if he could hit them. Why were they so hard to see, even when they were in his face? Oh, why was he even wasting his time with these brats? Dashing toward where he sensed the old man, the Mizu Bunshin jumped high in the air. He raised his sword over his head with every intention of cleaving the Tazuna into two pieces. Noticing the nuke Nin too late, all Sakura could do was jump backward, shoving Tazuna roughly aside as she raised her kunai in a feeble defense. Tazuna watched in horror as the man continued on his path, no sign of changing his original intentions. Then just as the Mizu Bunshin was bringing its deadly blade down, it erupted into water that showered the girl. Both Tazuna and Sakura stared in surprise at this. What had just happened? Then the sound of loud, mocking laughter came from the other side of the smoke screen. A soft breeze was more than enough to slowly blow the fading smoke away. The sight that beheld them was surprising. Sasuke stood by the water's edge. Kakashi was free, if drenched, and had blocked Zabuza found throwing a Fuma Shuriken he must have caught at the loud blurry image of a blonde that was running across the water back for shore. How the heck did this come to have happened? When the boys retreated from the water's edge, Zabuza and Kakashi engaged in a battle of water jutsus, climaxing with a pair of Suryuden no Jutsu. The water dragon sent in enormous waves crashing onto shore. Then Zabuza and Kakashi engaged went through another series of identical and impossible-to-see hand seals. But apparently the copycat Jounin finished first, and sent a huge blast of water into Zabuza and pushing onto shore. What had happened next just sickened Tazuna. A boy, probably no older than the genin escorting him, killed Zabuza. He was collecting the man's body when suddenly the blonde spoke out as he was approaching from the water. "Hey!" Naruto yelled. "Aren't you supposed to burn the body?" As his teammates looked at him with odd expressions, the new arrival used the distraction to vanish, leaving the kids to carry Kakashi as he fainted from chakra depletion. It seemed as though the danger had passed. The master bridge builder was now proudly leading the way back his home. Oh, how he yearned for the security and comfort of his own home, a good bed, and hot meal. This was just too much for an old man like himself. Kakashi was unconscious for nearly 2 days. To the genins, it was a boring time. All they could really do was guard the house, do chores, go into the small town, explore the wilderness, or train. Well, in Sakura's case, she busied herself with adoring Sasuke and trying to get him to speak with her. She wanted a step-by-step story of how he was magically able to free Kakashi. Of course, Sasuke being Sasuke, he only ignored her in favor of perfecting one of the Uchiha clan's favored jutsus, Katan, Ryuka no Jutsu. He went to the nearby coast and practiced performing the jutsu into the water. It was a lower Jounin level jutsu, but he was still able to perform it with a moderate amount of control. Several times, however, he scorched his throat while trying to exhale the fire blast. Panting after his most recent use, he felt the chakra in his system being depleted faster than he appreciated. It wasn't enough. He needed more power. He needed stronger jutsus as that man would only have and use the very strongest of the ones he copied. But he wouldn't be able to obtain his goal in life if he died of chakra exhaustion. With serious reluctance, he turned and headed back toward Tazuna's house. Yet he swore that he'd be back once his chakra was replenished enough. His path took him straight through a dense wooded area. It was relaxing to walk through the woods of a foreign area with no obnoxious fangirls hounding his every step. It was calming to hear the wind in the leaves and branches. It was also very refreshing to breathe the scent of the ocean with a forest of various plants. But this calm didn't last long. As he was passing near the center of the woods, he heard a familiar voice groaning loudly, like he was straining to lift something. Then there came an audible burst and the unique splattering of water. What was that? Yielding to his curiosity, Sasuke altered his course to converge on the sounds. As he drew closer, he spotted a familiar patch of bright blonde hair standing on a small pool of water. With his back to Sasuke, the Uchiha couldn't see what he was doing. But he did sense a large amount of chakra coming from the boy as he focused on his hands and feet, evidently. Grunting in concentration, Naruto's back hunched forward as his body grew taut with strain. Then, with a louder burst now that he was closer, Sasuke watched as water erupted from the general area of both his hands. What was that? What is that dope doing? He wondered as he continued to watch with a growing interest. Making sure that he was hidden perfectly in the underbrush, Sasuke waited patiently for the blonde to move. Apparently, whatever Naruto was doing had caused him to lose focus because he suddenly dropped into the pond and had to climb to shore. Dropping to his knees and panting loudly, he just sat there for a moment. However, after a loud and deep breath, he climbed back onto his feet. An excitement suddenly rose in Sasuke for a second. Maybe the dobe was attempting to make another jutsu, probably something with water. He suspected that the idiot had created that smokescreen and image blur like he had with the Oiroku no Jutsu. What was it trying to make now? Maybe he could learn it from the dobe if it was worth his time, even if the dobe wouldn't willingly teach him. All he'd need was the Sharingan. Then he crushed that feeling in an instant, narrowing his eyes as he cast a glare at the blonde. Whatever that baka was doing was probably only another ridiculous jutsu like Oiroku no Jutsu. Why should he degrade himself by learning or copying a technique that was probably just worthless in the end? I know you're there, Sasuke, Sakura, Naruto barked angrily. Sakura? He couldn't help but question. When did she get here? The realization that he hadn't been able to sense Sakura's approach due to his lack of attention was like a slap to his face. Snorting in disdain at being caught by a dobe nonetheless, Sasuke merely turned and walked away with a glare on his face. Why were you two spying on me? Naruto asked bluntly, watching as Sakura stared yearningly at Sasuke's retreating back for a moment. What were you doing? Sakura asked, ignoring his question. That happy gleam in her eye quickly shifted to disgruntled curiosity as she faced him. What were those things you had? I saw them explode in your hands. An all-too-familiar grin grew on his face as Naruto ignored the dangerous gaze the girl was sending him. I'm training, he said simply. Making more jutsus? Sakura asked, trying to sound uninterested when, in fact, she was very interested. These jutsus are mine, Naruto said in a voice that was thick with warning as his grin faltered. Then, after a second, it was back with a slight blush on his face. And I really don't want to share them, Sakura. Not even with you. Sakura was close to giving him another fist in the face when a chance memory. In her head was a replay of all the jutsus that she'd seen the blonde use, but one suddenly stuck out in her head. Yesterday, he'd shown somehow he could do something that she knew for a fact was beyond what even Sasuke could do at this moment. Naruto, she said suddenly, in a kinder and questioning tone. Yesterday you were walking on water. How did you do that? In a flash, the large foxy grin suddenly seemed to fill his face. With pride, Naruto practically sang out, "That is my secret." What? My secret, he repeated. Naruto, Sakura said with a tone that immediately sent him quivering in fear. What do you call those jutsus? Oboro and Enmaku, he said, not wanting to draw Sakura's wrath onto him so soon. Teach me them, Naruto-san, Sakura said, wording it like a request but saying it like a demand while trying to use formality to shock the blonde into complying. No, Sakura-san, Naruto said, mirroring the girl's underhanded tactic. He was sent flying back into the pond seconds after flashing a foxy grin at the girl. Tree climbing? Yeah, Kakashi answered simply. Despite having to use a pair of crutches to be able to walk, he still was able to tower over the gathered genins. Standing in thick of the wooded area that the kids had spent a little time exploring earlier, the three genins stared at Kakashi. Sakura and Sasuke had disgusted looks on their faces at the aspect of climbing trees for their training. Because he at least suspected what Kakashi had in store for them, Naruto had an eager gleam in his eye. What kind of training is that? Sakura asked, trying to keep the resentment out of her voice and failing miserably. This isn't normal tree climbing, Kakashi clarified. You won't be using your hands. Naruto's face instantly brightened as his infamous foxy grin appeared. Now this would be a challenge. Sasuke and Sakura could only look confused at their sensei and annoyed at Naruto. How? Sakura persisted. Well, watch, the Jounin said with a resigned sigh. Bringing up his hands from his pockets, he formed the Hitsuji seal. A faint glow of blue drew the genin's attentions to his feet. Then wobbling over to the nearest tree, Kakashi put his foot upon the trunk and continued to wobble up the tree, completely defying gravity. The trio of genin stared in awe at their sensei as he came to rest hanging underneath a tree limb almost 30 feet in the air. You understand now? He asked, slightly amused. Gather your chakra into the bottom of your feet and climb up a tree. This is something that you can do once you can use chakra well. Wait a minute, Sakura called out forcefully. How is learning to climb a tree going to make us stronger? Thus Kakashi launched into a tried and true lecture of how the art of tree climbing increased chakra reserves and how a person who learned to summon chakra into their feet could theoretically perform any known jutsu in the world. The explanation had Naruto quivering in anticipation to get started. With a mere flick of his wrist, the Jounin sent a trio of kunai down at the genin underneath him. He watched their first attempts at tree climbing amusedly. Sakura, with her perfect control, was able to climb more than 60 feet up her tree. Sasuke only got about 15 feet up before his control slipped and he accidentally pumped too much out. It resulted in him being flung off the tree, after he threw a slash across the trunk. Naruto only got 1 foot on the trunk before he was blasted clear across the tiny clearing and slammed into another tree. The tree he'd attempted to climb let out a loud crunching groan as the weakened base could no longer support its weight, sending it toppling over. The tree he slammed into had a clear imprint in its bark of the blonde's body. The Jounin thought. I guess that water walking may have increased his chakra reserves a little too much. Geez, Naruto, Sakura reprimanded. Can't you do anything without destroying something? Whoa! He yelled as he saw how high she got. That's awesome, Sakura-chan. Well, there you have it, Kakashi said easily. A clear gauge on how well each of you controls your own chakra compared to each other. Too much and you get repelled from the tree, far too much and you destroy the tree, and the right amount. Glancing down at the boys, he felt that a little jab at their self-worth would be needed to inspire them to continue. I guess among the three of you, Sakura is the closest to the becoming Hokage. That brought a small flinch from Naruto. And I guess the Uchiha prodigy isn't as great as we thought. This brought a scowl from Sasuke. Shut up, sensei! Sakura yelled, fearing that he was going to cause Sasuke to get mad at her. Neither boy seemed to pay much attention to Sakura as they looked at one another. Then, with smirks, they turned and sprinted for their respective trees. Seeing that they no longer needed any prompting, Kakashi made his way back down to the ground. If he could have, he might have stayed on the branch a while longer, but he could feel his already depleted reserves were quickly fading. Once safely on the ground, he left them to their exercises. It was hours later when Kakashi returned. Sakura lay panting on the ground underneath her tree as she watched the boys, or rather Sasuke, continue their training. Despite being madly in love with the boy, she couldn't quite dispel the pride in her knowing that she could do something far better than him for once, not including using her too large forehead. Her crush was scarcely any higher than where he had been. In fact, the tree looked as though a lunatic had come and hacked up the trunk. She couldn't help but notice the look of frustration on his face, and exhaustion. Maybe he'll come over here and ask me for help? She thought. This only brought on a fit of giggles despite her short breath. Yeah, he'll come over and ask me for help. Then, we'll talk and talk for hours. Just me and him paradise. But it didn't look like he was focused on her at all. He kept casting glares off to the side with a killer intent that even Zabuza could have been proud of, and then returned to running up his tree. Finally yielding to her curiosity, Sakura got up and walked over to where he was glaring. What she saw was Naruto. Except unlike what she thought he was doing, since she couldn't see him from where she had been, he was practically skipping up his tree while humming a melody. There were only a few scratch marks on his, and each was noticeably higher than the last. Whoa, was her only coherent thought as she watched the blonde travel high up into the branches, turn around and come down at the same speed, and then simply repeat his cycle. There was a heavy coating of sweat on his face, but other than that there were no noticeable signs of chakra depletion or exhaustion. When he caught her staring, Naruto faced her with a cocky foxy grin. Alright, that's enough, Kakashi yelled out. All three were in front of him shortly as he watched them. Sakura was spent with Sasuke not too far behind, only Naruto seemed slightly winded. Tomorrow, Naruto, you will guard Tazuna-san while he returns to his work on the bridge. He looked pointedly at Sasuke and Sakura as he continued. You two will come back here and continue training. Sakura, I know you've already mastered this, but I want you to stay and increase your reserves and stamina. The pink-haired kunoichi was torn. On one hand, why should she continue if she was clearly far above the boys in chakra control? On the other hand, it meant that she'd be out here with Sasuke, alone. That simple thought instantly crushed any complaints she had. Why do I have to do that? Naruto whined instantly. I want to train. I'm gonna be Hokage, so I gotta keep training. Because you have already a very large chakra reserve, Naruto, Kakashi answered, very annoyed at this predictable complaint. And I've given you a direct order. Naruto had a comical pout combined with an angry glare on his face. Well, there was no way that he was going to let a little boring guard duty stop him from training. The amount of manpower needed to build such a bridge, as well as the necessity for every pillar, every stone, and every nail to be exactly in the right spot for the bridge to not be weakened, should have interested him. The fact that there were a dozen men to do the job slowed the work pace, so the fact that they could be so thorough would have impressed him. Had he been even slightly interested? I'm so bored, Naruto whined for the 1000th time that morning. The men who were working close by could only grumble in annoyance. They had told the boy to shut up for the past 3 hours, but the blonde either ignored them or just complained louder. It was starting to seriously grate on their nerves. Shut up, kid, Tazuna growled. He was one of several men who were considering just telling the genin to leave and let them finish in peace. But the fact that Gata could attack at any moment prevented that thought. For if the greedy man did, this blonde would be their only defense. Naruto understood this too, which was what prevented him from leaving. Well, could we do something interesting already? The blonde demanded. Then his stomach let out a loud grumble. Patting it irritably, he glanced up at Tazuna, who was walking over. Can we eat? I'm hungry. Are there any ramen stands in this village? Sighing as his own stomach let out its agreement with the blonde, Tazuna turned back to his men and called out, All right, lunch break. Be back in 20 minutes. Yes, Naruto shouted, jumping to his feet and already heading towards town. Naruto, Tazuna said as they left the bridge and walked down the village streets. Where is the rest of your team? I thought you would all be here. Chuckling at his own private joke, Naruto grinned up at the man as he crossed his arms behind his head. They're out training, the little weaklings. It just comes to show why I'll be Hokage. Really now, Tazuna said as they approached a food store. Just why do you wish to become Hokage so badly anyway? Because I want to be the greatest shinobi in Konohagakure, the blonde replied immediately. Then everyone will have to stop disrespecting me and treat me like I'm someone important. Oh yeah, Tazuna mumbled. He'd forgotten that somehow, which was strange since the blonde was always talking about respect and the title of Hokage. Where's the ramen? Naruto asked as he looked around at the ridiculously small selections of food available at prices that were cheaper than even his usual cup of instant ramen. There isn't any, the shopkeeper said. What you see is what we got. This got a surprised gaze out of Naruto. Was the economy of Wave really so bad that the grocery stores couldn't even afford ramen? Then the entirety of the bridge's significance to the islands finally dawned on him. With a depressed sigh, his shoulders slumped as his gaze dropped, and he waited patiently for Tazuna to pick out the food. However, his depression didn't last long, for he felt a person reaching clumsily into his equipment pouch. Eat this! Naruto yelled as he reflexively spun and slammed his fist into the wannabe thief's stomach. The blows sent the man crumbling to the floor, gasping and grasping his stomach in pain. Never try to steal from a shinobi, Tozoku, Naruto growled as his sympathy for Wave Country was momentarily forgotten. Please go easy on him, Tazuna said as he approached. These are desperate times, which are why men and women do stuff like that. Clenching his fists to control his temper, Naruto nodded as they left the store and returned to bridge. As much as he wanted to train, he couldn't just leave Tazuna unprotected. Yet who said that he'd have to protect him the entire day? It had taken a while, but he'd pulled it off. No one noticed his momentary disappearance, or quick usage of the Kagebunshin. But now, after lunch, he proudly sat in the wooded area well away from where he knew his teammates would be. In his hand, he tried to perform his drilling jutsu without the water balloon. The results were strange. The chakra swirled around in his hand like a typhoon. It compressed itself into a loose sphere, but large tendrils of chakra still bled off it. It was certainly a flashy jutsu at this point. Now he just had to see how well it could do damage. It was this thought that propelled him into shoving the fragile sphere into the trunk of the tree closest to him. The outcome was surprising. The sound of weak grinding of wood sounded from inside the tree. There a small spiral pattern formed on the tree as the bark was peeled or torn off. However, the untamed swirling chakra lashed back out at him since it was still so close to the surface and his hand. The tendrils of chakra cut and sliced the palm of his hand, drawing shallow fissures of blood. Yelping, he reflexively drew his hand away and stared at it. It hurt like hell, but after a few moments he watched in awe as the wound began to heal. Now that is interesting, he thought bitterly. I bet it's that bastard fox, damn Kitsune. Because he didn't want there to be any evidence to these secret training sessions he was holding for himself, he licked the blood from his palm. Then he simply sat down and studied the tree in front of him. Apparently whatever was wrong with the jutsu wasn't the design. It worked perfectly if that was what happened to the tree. The thought of that happening to an enemy's body on the inside brought chuckles from the boy. Yet if he really wanted to make this jutsu truly dangerous, he needed to find a way to prevent that backlash of chakra from harming himself as well. But even though the jutsu seemed to be working, something in his gut told him that it still wasn't powerful enough. While the fact that it could at least shred a tree on the inside at this point was somewhat comforting, he wanted a more powerful version to not only grind up an enemy's innards, but to completely demolish them. He needed to increase its power while at the same time controlling it to not harm himself. This would require a lot of thought and a bit of ingenuity, he could tell. But unfortunately, he wasn't in the mood to think it out. So he did the next best thing. He got inspired for another jutsu. He was exhausted. Not just physically, but also in his chakra supply. He had not stopped once since they returned to the woods. His new tree now resembled the one from yesterday. He could get almost 30 feet up before he lost his concentration. It was like there was some barrier that was preventing him from getting any higher. But he was an Uchiha. He was supposed to be the best, the elite. How come he couldn't get this? In the academy, he'd excelled in everything and his dedication to become powerful was unsurpassed. So why couldn't he get any higher on this simple tree climbing exercise? Growling disgustedly at himself, he glanced over to where Sakura was supposed to be training. She had tried to train as long and as hard as him, but she collapsed from exhaustion only an hour after they started. Now, she was staring at him with red cheeks which only brightened when he glanced. She could do this exercise. Hell, even Naruto got it. They had made that painfully obvious to him as they ran up and down the trees as though they were running across a field. If that dobe and a fangirl could do it, why couldn't he? Taking a deep breath, Sasuke sat down on the ground for a short breather. Resting his chin in his palm, he tried to calm his temper and think about what he was doing wrong. In the long and short, he needed to use his chakra to stick him to the tree like his feet were suction cups. While he was doing this obviously, why couldn't he keep the pace? Another glance at Sakura brought a thought to his head that he really didn't want to do. But then again, if he didn't, he might not be able to get this exercise. And Sakura was the smartest kunoichi genin in their year. Even smarter than him, he'd admit, albeit not verbally. Maybe she could help him. but his pride forbade him from asking for help. But his pride would never allow him to be upstaged by anyone, least of all a person he'd always considered to be below him. Scowling, he climbed to his feet and walked over to the pink-haired girl. Apparently, even though she was looking right at him, she wasn't even seeing him. Off in her own little world of Sasuke's admitting eternal and unconditional love to her and her alone. "Sakura," he said quietly, hating himself for needing to ask for help. "Why can't I do this?" The girl blinked a few times before she finally focused on him. A large blush ran across her face as she glanced to the side. Somewhere deep inside his mind, where he allowed such thoughts, Sasuke found himself smiling at the girl's expression. She looked so damn cute like that. "Well," she said nervously, "I guess it could be because you're not focusing enough on your chakra." Glancing back up at him, she hesitantly asked, "What are you thinking about that is interfering with your concentration?" Sasuke didn't answer immediately. In his mind were memories of Naruto running up and down his tree while mockingly humming. Then there was Sakura sitting up high on a branch after her first try. These memories brought a small glare from him onto the girl in front of him inadvertently. Gasping as though he'd hit her with his glare, Sakura looked away as her blush faded. Sasuke had to mentally smack himself. He was supposed to be asking for help, not scaring the person who was trying to help him. "Naruto," Sasuke said in a voice thick with anger. "And you, it's pissing me off. You both did it so easily." It pained him to say that. He hated revealing that he had any weaknesses to anyone, least of all his teammates. It was unbecoming for an Uchiha prodigy to admit that he couldn't do something as good as or better than everyone else. The Uchiha hadn't been the elite for nothing. Understanding crept across Sakura's face as she looked back up at him. Then a small blush lit up her face as she realized that he had been thinking about her, even if it was in jealousy. "Well," she said again, "maybe you try to focus more on the tree than on us. After all, you know that chakra is spiritual energy, so if you can't concentrate on it properly, you won't be able to use it too well. But I think you should take a break, Sasuke-kun, you look a little tired." Thinking about this for a moment, Sasuke nodded his head. That would explain why he kept slipping. He had every intention of returning to his training when his knees suddenly gave out from underneath him. Dropping to the ground with as much dignity as he could muster, Sasuke did his best to ignore the surprised look in Sakura's eyes. Maybe he should take a little more time off before returning to his training. He sat on the pier looking out over the ocean. The sight was a beautiful contrast of reds, oranges, golds, and violets that were reflected off the clouds and water. However, this glorious image was lost on the man's single eye, which was glazed over in thought. In his mind played the information his Sharingan had absorbed while during his most recent fight. Though the Mizu Bunshin were nothing new to him, the Tsuruyoda no Jutsu was an interesting new addition. As well as Oboro and Enmaku, from what Naruto called them. He hadn't meant to copy them, but because the Sharingan was exposed and active, it couldn't be stopped. While Enmaku was relatively easy in principle and execution, the fact that it was indeed a Katon Jutsu surprised him. It was no secret that if a person didn't use enough chakra to perform a Katon Jutsu, it would only waste the chakra used. Yet Enmaku used just barely over the minimum to form the smoke screen. And once the smoke was formed inside him, then he could begin to increase the chakra used to enhance the effective range of the smoke screen. A truly ingenious concept, especially from the one everyone called Dead Last. However, Oboro no Jutsu was above and beyond many ninjutsu that he'd ever seen. The fact that Naruto had literally done the hand seals in front of him was the only reason he copied it. For once he engaged it, the chakra inside his body began to leak out and surround him. While to the naked eye it blurred Naruto's image, to the Sharingan it practically blinded him. Since the Sharingan is able to see a person's chakra inside their body, the fact Naruto's was encasing his body meant that all Kakashi could see was a bright glowing silhouette. How could this kid have developed such a strange, but undeniably useful technique? It was no secret that the blonde was a notorious prankster who had adept sensory skills. But the fact that he never heard of the blonde's creation of this jutsu was like an itch, it wouldn't go away. Behind him, he sensed Tazuna and Naruto's return. Tazuna seemed both content to be home after a long day's work and annoyed at the loud blonde's jubilant voice. Naruto was shouting about instantly leaving to train his chakra control. While before Kakashi might have believed him, now he wasn't so sure. Could the blonde simply be trying to find an excuse to go out and make another jutsu? "Naruto!" he called out. "Come over here. I need to talk to you." "Sensei," the blonde whined as he hurried over. "Can I go train now? I just spent an entire day doing absolutely nothing but watch an old man play economic reconstruction." Tazuna snorted at that rude, if accurate, phrase before finally walking into his home. The smells coming from Tsunami's cooking were very alluring. Did you create those jutsu you used during the battle with Zabuza? He asked, watching closely for any telltale signs of deception. Yeah, what of it? The blonde demanded. If that's all this is about, I want to go train now. Naruto, Kakashi's commanding voice froze the boy as he tried to walk away. Why would you make such peculiar jutsus? You do realize that no normal shinobi could have just made them on a whim? Hey, I'm not the prankster master for nothing. The demon container snapped in his defense. Besides, whoever said I was normal? And why would you even care why I made those jutsu? You do realize that because of the Sharingan, I was able to copy them, right? He asked, wondering on the blonde's reaction. Naruto paled, quite visibly despite his tan skin. In an instant he had grabbed Kakashi's vest and was with a glare in his eyes while he shouted directly into his face. What? Why would you do that, Baka-sensei? Those are my jutsu. I made them. What gave you the right to steal them like that? Calm down, the Jounin commanded, slightly caught off balance due to the boy's threatening reaction. I didn't mean to take them. I swear on my honor as a shinobi. Reluctantly prying his hands off the man, Naruto fixed a deadly glare on the man. Fine, he said in a deceptively calm tone. I guess I can live with this. But if you teach anyone, especially Sasuke, my jutsus, I swear you're going to regret it. Kakashi nodded understandingly. He always had a similar fear when he was younger, back when he first created his prize jutsu and the Uchiha clan was still prominently in power. I see that you are protective of them, Kakashi said quietly. But you're going to have a tough time keeping them secret once Sasuke gets his Sharingan eyes. What? Naruto asked, his anger momentarily gone and replaced by confusion. He has them too? How? The Sharingan is a bloodline that is only found in the Uchiha clan, the Jounin answered. He saw the suddenly calculating look in the blonde's eye and quickly spoke up before he could ask the obvious question. I'm not an Uchiha. And no, I'm not going to talk about it. Sensei, Naruto said, looking up with a strange expression on his face. What can the Sharingan actually do? Sasuke said it copies jutsus, but Zabuza said that wasn't all. Yes, that is true, Kakashi confirmed. He suddenly got the feeling that Naruto was being a lot more attentive and patient. This was information he wanted and felt that he needed to know. It was intriguing to the man to see this side of the terrible prankster's personality. The Sharingan can also see through most genjutsus, like the Byakugan, Kakashi said. And also like the Byakugan, it can see how a person's chakra flows inside their body. Now, the stronger the Sharingan, the easier it is for that person to anticipate their opponent's moves. I can even enter my opponent's mind and implant suggestions like which ninjutsu to use or how he'd react. That's creepy, Naruto said, shuddering at the thought of having Sasuke doing such a thing to him. Yes, to a degree I guess it is. The man looked thoughtfully at the blonde for a moment before saying. You probably don't realize it, Naruto. But you may have created a jutsu that could block the Sharingan. What? Naruto looked surprised for a moment. Then it melted away into pride and eagerness. Which one? Oboro, he said. Because the Sharingan sees an opponent's chakra flow inside their body, I can see how he molds it when he's casting jutsus. When you activated your Oboro no jutsu, I couldn't see you anymore. With your chakra surrounding your body rather than being tucked away inside, it was like I was staring into fire. I could see your body, but not your features. And if you can't see them, you might not be able to see any hand seals after I activate it during a fight, the blonde said quietly as a thoughtful expression passed over his face. Sensei, he said, looking up with a hopeful gleam in his eye. Is it possible that I have bloodline like the Sharingan? Kakashi blinked for a moment. Then he smiled. Possible, but I highly doubt it. Bloodline limits are rare and only the best of clans or families have them in Konoha. Seeing as how you're an orphan, it wouldn't be unfair to say you could, but the chances aren't in your favor. This brought a scowl to the boy's face. Sensei, we're back, called an overly excited feminine voice. Looking over, the pair caught a glimpse of Sasuke and Sakura returning from the forest. Both looked to be exhausted, though Sasuke was clearly the one to have been doing any serious training. What seemed especially odd was Sakura was holding Sasuke's hand and he wasn't protesting. Or maybe he was simply too tired to. Sakura-chan! Naruto yelled, large happy eyes lighting his face. How was training? Did you get any better? Sasuke team still having trouble? Shut up, Naruto! Both genin yelled as they made their way towards the house. Kakashi absent-mindedly reached into his pocket and pulled out his Aika Paradise. He'd been yearning to read it all day, but Blonde Enigma was eating away at his curiosity. Now that he was at least partially sated, he felt safe to return to a familiar hobby. Yet he didn't miss the suspicious glance from Sasuke that bounced from him to Naruto and back. Jealous, eh? He thought that seemed incredibly ridiculous. The number one rookie jealous of the dead last because he was having a private conversation with their sensei? Perhaps he should give the Uchiha some extra attention in the near future to dispel that line of thought. He had never really trained for a cause before. Naruto had always trained for himself, learning the basics and above of chakra control well before his classmates, straining his body to perform his katas as perfectly as he could without a sparring partner. Usually he even went long into the night trying to finally gain mastery over an exercise or jutsu. Yet all that had never been for any other reason than to reach his own goals. Now he felt a new determination welling up inside of himself. This feeling of doing something for someone else was a very empowering feeling. The rush it gave him was enough to make him forget his tired body and to push himself well past his normal limits. He was going to show Inari that heroes do exist. If he could get stronger faster, then he could protect everyone easier sooner. And there was little doubt in his mind that he would need all the strength he could get in the near future, with Zabuza still alive. But it was because of this empowering feeling that he pushed himself too far. Somewhere around 4 a.m, he finally collapsed of exhaustion in both body and chakra depletion. Around him in the small clearing was kicked up piles of leaves and grass. Several trees had puncture marks that looked like a large but short blade or hammer of some sort had been thrust into them. Snoring fitfully, he lay ignorant of the birds that landed on him. Not the bird that stood on his headband and was chirping quite loudly could awaken him. Those were natural sounds and smells that his mind and body ignored, even in his sleep. But a new scent wafted up into his nose. It was foreign to nature, thus potential dangerous. In an instant, his mind was awakened and his eyes snapped open with his hand snapping automatically to his kunai pouch. What he saw was a slender figure standing over him starting to reach down, probably to poke him. With the way the hair was so long and silky, it seemed to Naruto that this was a young girl about his age. She wore a slightly surprised gaze due to the abruptness that he'd awoken. But she quickly covered it with a kind smile as she knelt down next to him saying, "You shouldn't sleep out here or you'll catch a cold." "Who are you?" he asked, wiping the sleep from his eyes. "Just a friend," she said simply. "But you can call me Haku." "Haku?" he said, looking at her. Well, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. What are you doing out here?" "I was collecting herbs to be used in an ointment I'm making," Haku answered, smiling again. "An ointment?" he questioned. "You mean to heal someone? Can I help?" "Sure." And just like that, Naruto set about helping gather the plants to help this person. It was actually kind of relaxing to him to do it. To go through the various plants on the ground, looking for the specific kinds, and picking them helped to relieve a bit of tension that had been building up in his body for some time. "Thanks for helping out," Haku said when the basket was noticeably fuller. "You sure are working early," Naruto observed as he sat down on the ground. "You too," Haku pointed out. "What are you doing here at this time of the morning?" Chuckling at the memories of his own teammates asking him that very question only several days ago, he answered honestly, if bluntly. "I'm training." "Really? Wow," Haku said. "But why are you training?" "Because I need to become stronger." "But you look pretty strong already," the strange girl said quietly. It was indeed true. Though they were mostly hidden underneath his jacket, Naruto's muscular arms were leaving distinguishable bulges in his sleeves. "No, I need to be stronger," he said, waving his arms for emphasis. "That's the only way I can prove that heroes exist." "Heroes?" Haku asked. "What do you mean?" "I need to prove to Agaki that just because his father died, there are still heroes in the world," Naruto said proudly. "Really?" Haku said, slightly disappointed. "So you train for others to recognize you?" "Eh?" The look of confusion on his face brought small chuckles for Haku. "What's so funny?"